Are you familiar with FBI Special Agents Kyle Seraphin?
I'm familiar with the name.
Is that yes?
I'm familiar with the name. I'm familiar with the name. I'm familiar with the name.
Former FBI agent Kyle Seraphin, who recently received a letter from the FBI saying, be quiet about this. Kyle, welcome to the show. You're not following orders.
So, Kyle, you had some issues that brought you here as a whistleblower. Joining me now to discuss is FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin. Kyle, thanks for spending some time with us again. Joining me now is FBI whistleblower Kyle Seraphin. Joining me now is a frequent guest of the show, former FBI special agent, whistleblower as well, Kyle Seraphin.
Let's bring in Kyle Seraphin. He's the FBI whistleblower who helped expose government censorship of our First Amendment rights.
Right, we're lucky to have him with us today. He's Kyle Seraphin, a real whistleblower himself.
Now, we only have this memo because a recently suspended FBI agent called Kyle Seraphin brought it to the public, and we're grateful that he did. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Why did you decide to become a whistleblower?
I just made a decision that this is America's information, it's not mine, and I'm not going to let the FBI steamroll me and my family.
Kyle Seraphin, he's a former FBI agent. He's the host of the Kyle Seraphin podcast, and he joins us on the phone. Hello, Kyle. Great to have you back with us, sir.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Kyle Seraphin.
Let's turn it over to two former FBI special agents turned whistleblowers who are holding the Bureau accountable, Steve Friend and Kyle Seraphin.
A brave FBI whistleblower who is a friend of our show, also Dan Bongino's. Kyle Seraphin. He's the host of something that strangely is called The Kyle Seraphin Show. Follow him on Twitter. I'm Sebastian Gorka. I'll call you later. We'll talk guns. We'll talk optics.
All right. Any update on your whistleblower situation?
No, I expect to be attacked for the foreseeable future.
Okay. At least you're realistic. Thanks so much, Kyle.
All right. Kyle Seraphin, former FBI agent, also host of the Kyle Seraphin podcast. Thanks as always, Kyle. Good to talk to you today, sir.
Perfect, man. God bless you, brother. Thank you for standing up for the truth, man. Thank you for coming on.
Steve, Kyle, you guys are great Americans, and it's an honor to have you on the program. Have a great weekend.
And follow him, Kyle Seraphin, with a PH on Twitter. God bless you, Kyle. This is
Well, so Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. Great chatting with you.
Kyle Seraphin, thank you.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time, but you got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Take a look behind the curtain with a real whistleblower and American patriot. Prepare to embrace the uncomfortable truth because this program has no time for comforting lies. Here is civil liberties enthusiast, Second Amendment defender, and recovering FBI agent Kyle Seraphin.
Oh, there it is, unmuted. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Kyle Seraphin Show. Today is Thursday. It's August the 17th. We had a late Twitter space last night talking about the Federalist Papers, basic civics stuff, love letters to our federal republic. And if you didn't hear it, you can check it out on Twitter. You can go to my Twitter page at Kyle Seraphin. I think it's worth some of your time at least. Get the opening arguments, get some of the discussion points. Covered a number of Federalist Papers. This is kind of the stuff that we need to be doing. But today, we're going to be talking about, I think, a failure of what has happened in our Federalist Republic when the federal government is overreaching, when the balance is tipped too far to the right towards the centralized national government. And that is because we're going to be talking to Tara Reade, who in many ways is a suspendable as well. She spoke up. She shared her story. She's a former staffer for Leon Panetta, for Joe Biden. She is a geopolitical analyst. She's an author. She's a mother. She's an American citizen. and she doesn't feel safe living in America. We got into why that was and all of those things. I think you guys will see that in just a second. Before we launch into this interview, what I do want to do is say thank you to my friends over at Catholic Vote real quickly. Here they are. There's Catholic Vote. You guys have seen it. It really is a nice webpage. Go there, catholicvote.org. Check out catholicvote.org, and you can enter in your email address, your zip code, hit the button that says Loop Me In. It's yellow right there on that video screen. Loop me in, and you will get the loop. And today's loop has all kinds of really good stuff in it. It's full of useful information like federal courts ending mail order abortion pills in the Fifth Circuit. Well done, Fifth Circuit. Getting things done for the suspendables, for the Feds for Medical Freedom, and also for this lawsuit. There's one about school choice in Alabama. There's a poll and an article written about protecting kids from pornography in schools. Seems like a useful thing to do. Preschools that are suing the state of Colorado, St. Mary's Catholic Parish there is doing that. Leftists defending disgrace teacher in Santa Barbara after an assault. Target continuing to collapse, and so on and so forth. Lots of really good stories. Check out the Loop. They got their issues sorted out, I guess, yesterday, and the Loop will be in your email box if you put in your email, your zip code, and loop me in. Real easy to go. Okay, that's number one. And then we've got a really pretty exciting special announcement for you. Some of you are seeing in the chat my friend Garrett O'Boyle, GOB Actual, sitting in there. What have we got coming up for them? But Suspendables merch. The hashtag Free the Merch has worked. Folks, your campaign, your advocacy is making a difference here. It is moving the needle. There it is, the Suspendables collection. If you're watching on our Rumble channel, you can see it right there. So you've got Make Whistleblowers Great Again. You've got Suspendable or Die. You've got the Suspendables with a guy wearing, I think, a plate carrier and a jacket. Looks like the Hamilton logo. The Suspendables PT shirt for those who want to do some workouts and let people know that you're suspendable. The website is the-suspendables.com. Again, the-suspendables.com. You can see it on the screen. I will add it to the show notes for sure. The-suspendables.com. You can get your Suspendables merch. We got some more stuff being added. Garrett is spinning up the presses and making these things happen for you. So those of you who are looking for a t-shirt, you want to express your First Amendment rights via your t-shirt while you still can until you get canceled by the government. There it is, the Suspendables collection. Good stuff. What a good day, Thursday here. We're having no technical difficulties. Looks like Dan Bongino might have lit a fire over at those people at Rumble and is getting it done. So we appreciate that. Okay, without too much further ado, I want to bring on our guest. I think you guys are going to really appreciate this. Tuck in for a little bit of time. Here we go. My friend, Tara Reade. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited about this interview. We are speaking to Tara Reade. She is in Moscow. That is not America. She is speaking to us here live in Liberty Hill, Texas, and we are going to get to the bottom of what has been called a defection, which I think is probably the wrong word. We made this connection again. So Tara and I have talked a number of times over the last few months. She reached out to me yesterday, and I knew that this story was something you all should hear as well. So we're going to get to the bottom of what's going on with her situation, and I'm going to debunk any of the myths that have been put out there in the mainstream media, and there are many of them. We're going to get the whole story here. So, folks, I think you're going to really want to tune in. Clear your schedules. I don't know how long this will take, but let's get going. And Tara, thanks for joining me at such a late hour. What time is it right now?
Oh, it's like, 10:45 or so at night.
It's is okay. Late, so I appreciate you staying up late. People stay up late in Russia's not even Europe. What do we call that? Eurasia?
No, I mean it's the East, I guess. But Russia is. You're right, though. It does get light early. Like at 3 or 4 in the morning, it starts getting light. So yeah. So and in St. Petersburg, it stays light. They have white nights, and it stays. I was there for white nights. It's quite beautiful. It's light almost until 2, 3 in the morning. It's quite lovely.
That's kind of like what goes on in Anchorage, I guess. Is it that far up?
Yes.
I never think of it as that far up, but I guess that makes sense. All right. Before we get too far afield, because I will just get sideways and we'll just start chatting, let's tell people who you are and why they know your name and what sort of the prequel of the story is, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of it as long as you'd like to tell it. But start with maybe where you grew up. I read a quick bio on you, some things I didn't know, like you'd lived in Wisconsin. Maybe tell us the story of growing up.
Yeah. I was born in Monterey, California, Monterey County, California. And my parents moved when I was a baby to Wisconsin and had a farm. My father owned a business, and so he was what you call a gentleman farmer, if you will. And my mom had like an acre organic garden, and we had 80 acres. And lots of animals, and it was a very nice upbringing. I don't think I even had fast food until I was 15 years old because we were really living off the land. We had beef cattle. Our neighbor had dairy cattle. So it was quite a wholesome upbringing, and I had a couple of brothers. My family had its ups and downs, and my parents divorced when I was 13. And my father was a defense contractor. I became a defense contractor. He also was the president of PR for Honeywell, and so he was pretty establishment. My mother, on the other hand, was an artist, and she was not establishment at all, and she was an activist and anti-war, and marched and then also helped boys go to Canada to avoid the Vietnam draft. Although my brother served, Michael, he was a conscientious objector, but he did go overseas during the Vietnam War. He was quite a bit older than me. And my brother Michael unfortunately died when I was young, and he and I were very close. So it was a really hard time for me when he died. But my mother was quite, she was quite the activist, and very outspoken, and and a guiding force. And so I kind of had political cognitive dissonance, if you will. I had a great grandmother that was a communist, and I had Republicans, and I had, but mostly Democrats in my family. And I went on very interested in politics, as well as acting. I was in acting and classically trained when I was young. And my first professional work was when I was 16. It was as a writer and an actress. I wrote some poetry that was published, and that was my first paycheck ever. And then after that, I did modeling and acting professionally. I moved out of the house. And then, I was really needing to feed the intellect and was really into political science and geopolitics. It was just always a fascination. I was a debate person in high school and went to state with debate. I mean, I was really into it. So I had this opportunity in college. I was approached by one of my professors, and they said, hey, there's an internship with Leon Panetta's office, and I think that you might fit the bill for it if you want to try to apply. And so I did, and I was hired, and I went and worked for him. And then after the internship, I was trained in campaigns and worked as a Democratic operative. And then I went on and worked for Joe Biden. And
before we jump into that, will you give people context of Leon Panetta, what he was doing? I think a lot of people know the name and don't know who he is, and then maybe what you mean by the word political operative, which I hear a lot, but I don't have a great idea of what it means.
Okay. Well, you have different roles in campaigns. I was a field manager, and I was more in strategy of, how to win that congressional campaign. So I was working on that and overseeing volunteers, hundreds of volunteers, and also strategy of how to win it. And, we're trained by different organizations, think tanks. They come in and they do trainings and teach you how to do that. I really enjoyed doing that work. There are other people that do campaign opposition research. That's a little more, that's the hit things that you see. I wasn't really, even back then, I didn't like that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But there are other people that's their, wheelhouse. But overall, it's almost like they even call it a war room when you're running a campaign. It's very much like war. You're dealing with strategy and you're trying to win. And you do what it takes to do that. As far as Congressman Panetta, I just said it, he was a congressman he's from Carmel Valley, California. I was born in Monterey, as you know, so it's in that same district. And back then it was district there. And he represented that area before he went into the CIA. He was also a former White House chief of staff for Bill Clinton, but left, and I believe he left in disgust. So my time at Leon Panetta's was unremarkable. I mean, I learned a lot, but he was really, a kind of person that seemed very serious about his work. He would stay up late reading the bills. There was no nonsense in his office, not like with Joe Biden. And he was an interesting person. I disagree with a lot of his positions, particularly on war. And, as it stands right now, he's on the board of Raytheon, which is a missile company. So And so when you see him comment about Ukraine and be really, forceful about that, just remember he's lining his pockets. So,
and he was the Secretary of Defense and as well as the CIA. So obviously very entrenched in the military industrial type world, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Now, I want to dig into a little bit of this. You gave us kind of a taste of your dad was a military defense contractor. You said, did I get that right? Mm-hmm. And
That's
mom
correct.
is an activist. Who do you think you took after, or did you take a little bit of both?
I took after my mother, I guess, as far as because I did work for traditional Democrats, and I wanted to work in the Senate. I wanted to run for office eventually. Then I guess there's a little bit of my dad there too. So yeah, working within the system to make change.
Okay.
I didn't like marching. I wasn't the type that liked to hold signs or march. That wasn't my thing. So.
Instead of that, you like to work in the office end and actually execute strategy, it sounds like.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I like to work behind the scenes and do all that.
So you've gone from intern, we've gone into a operative working on campaign work. And then what was the door that opened that allowed you to go to work for Joe Biden?
I was actually hired at the interview, which is, I thought that was normal, but apparently that's not. But I did a phone call interview with the scheduler, and then someone else jumped on the line. I think one of my other supervisors who became my supervisor, and I can't really recall. But then I flew out for the final interview, and I was sitting and being interviewed, and Joe Biden breezed in with a couple of his staff. And her office was like right next to his and kind of out in the open. So he had to walk past her to get to his door. And he just looked at me and our conversation, and he interrupted and introduced himself. And she basically, Marianne basically said, who was the scheduler, she said, oh, this is Tara Reade. And he said, oh, an Irish name, Tara, And then she said she worked for Leon Panetta as an intern. And he said, oh, Leon, he's a great guy. He's a good man. And then he looked at me, and he just looked at me and looked back at her and said, you should hire her. She's hired. So, and then
that was
left. He left. He moved away, and then she looked at me and said, okay, so you're hired. And I'm like, okay.
And that's not common, you're saying?
Huh?
That's not common, apparently.
Apparently not. I thought it was I left, and, being in my 20s, I thought, oh, okay, cool. You get hired at the interview. That never happened again in my life. So yeah, that was interesting.
We have a picture, I think, of your ID badge from that era. This is when you were working for Leon Panetta. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, will you pull up the picture of the ID badge just for kind of funds, just kind of vintage setup if you can?
Yeah, give me 1 second. I got to track it down. I'll get it.
Okay, no problem. And then there's also, we have a photo from probably about that era, I'm thinking, where you have the long hair and the red drawers on. So we're going to throw a couple of photos up from that kind of time frame. And so you get hired right at the interview. There's that photo. Look at that. So that was your congressional ID as an intern, I think. Does that sound right?
Correct.
And you have the curly hair there. And so you get hired right off the spot. You don't know any better. Did you go back and talk to your colleagues in that space and hear about different hiring stories? I know the FBI, we always compared notes.
Well, it's interesting because I left, right? And a friend was waiting for me, and they expected to just because I traveled there we would go out to dinner and just see the sights or whatever. And I was like, well, I got the job. And he was amazed. He was like, what? You got it at the interview. And I said, yeah. And then he said, well, let's go celebrate. Let's go to New York. So we went to New York City and we celebrated, took the train up and had fun and met other friends and celebrated. And then I went back to California and packed up my world and moved to DC.
And thus began the great adventure in many ways. What did you see, if you can think back to that time, what did you think you were embarking on as far as a life? Because I'm sure it went differently.
Oh, I thought it was the beginning of my career. I was very enthusiastic. At that point, Joe Biden was very powerful in the Senate. He was the chairman of Judiciary, chairman of the Foreign Relations. I was really fascinated with the Foreign Relations Committee, with anything to do with geopolitics. And I wanted to eventually run for Senate if I could, or Congress. So I looked at him as, he's about my father's age at that time, as a mentor, frankly. And So I was very kind of starstruck that I got to work in the Senate. I was so proud to serve my country. I was so proud to be in public service. It's what I always wanted to do. And so, yeah, I felt like I was in the right place. That feeling like, oh, this is it. This is the right place to be.
And what about the people you worked with? What was the climate in the office, the other staffers?
That was interesting because right away I got the vibe that there was a lot of unhappiness, and it was very top down. And the chief of staff is Ted Kaufman. And Ted Kaufman, now I know more about his background. He's from DuPont Corporation and was very high up in that. And he runs it like kind of that, like a very kind of a corporate kind of feel. Also, Biden has, you're given, each office is given the same amount of money, but they allocate it the way they wish. The chief of staff is responsible for that. And Biden's office was 49th out of 50 in pay. So for all the staffers, because my pay was very low. It was very hard to live on the wage that they gave us because they kept it top heavy. So like Ted Kaufman got a lot of money, and Dennis Toner and some of the other upper level, but other staffers and legislative aides, we were paid very little. So it was interesting.
Well, you hear people, sometimes they say you get paid in salary, and sometimes you get paid with the title. It sounds like they were hoping you were getting by with the title and you were excited about your resume.
Right, and you had a lot of privilege there. You had a lot of people that were trust funders. I think this was sort of the beginning of that era that you have back east, where the media and where the politics are run by these, barons of industry's children, right? Like they're privileged. They've gone to all the right schools. Like, they would have conversations about the different Ivy League schools they went to. I went to community college, and my mother was highly educated, but self-educated. My father did go to Colgate, but that's neither here nor there. He I don't consider that really an Ivy League school. And he had to actually go back and get to his master's. So, I think it's interesting that there was a lot of snobbery around that on the Hill, even back then, like who went to Brown and who went to Harvard and such. So I think that era started, and it was really starting in. And now you see that with the media, where you see media people where they're coming from these Ivy League schools and they have no idea how to do real journalism. They're just, they've had a very different life.
You're touching on something that has been very dear to my heart. People like Matt Taibbi and even my father, who was in media for a long time, always talked about journalism being a blue collar profession where people would go and try to hold the powerful to account. And now it seems like they just want to pad their friendships that they have with them. How did you fit into that culture? Did you get along with your colleagues?
Oh, I got along okay. I just didn't try to fit in. I remember too, I kind of had the attitude, because at this point I'm 28 years old, 27 years old, and I already had I'd been on movie sets and film sets and different work environments, and then worked in campaigns. I didn't necessarily socialize with the people I worked with. Now they did, they all socialized with each other, but I kept a little bit of a distance. And I think there wasn't even a hit article written about that, but I wasn't an outlier, an outsider. I simply didn't think it was a good idea to go. And I wasn't a drinker. I don't really drink alcohol. I don't do drugs. And a lot of the people in that culture at that time were doing cocaine. They were doing drugs. They were doing drinking, and they were partying. And they would even do it at the House and the Senate. And especially on long nights when there was bills and stuff, you'd see a lot of drinking and stuff. And I just wasn't part of that culture.
It makes a lot of sense.
Once in a while I did. Once in a while, I did my wild whatever, went to the Irish pub and, whatever. But I wasn't like an angel. But I just mean, it wasn't a regular practice. It wasn't something that I sought out to do. It wasn't like, oh, this Friday night, this is all I want to do.
Sure.
I was social. I also had built, because of Congressman Leon Panetta, I had built friendships with some girls that we lived in this place called the Nunnery. They nicknamed it Thompson Markson Hall. And it was girls only, and boys were not allowed up after 9 o'clock. Of course, women snuck their boyfriends up because we were in their 20s, whatever. But it was like like college. And so I made some really good friends. In fact, I'm still friends with some of them today. Well, now it's a little more difficult, but carried on for decades, our friendship, because you're living in that dorm and then you're all walking across the street to the sun at the house. And it was supposed to be the safe place, like in DC, because DC was seen as so dangerous during that time. It was considered a very dangerous city. There was even like a headline article about that at that time. And what's ironic about that is the actual predators were in Congress.
Let's talk about that. First of all, give me the feeling of living in DC at the time. Having worked in there, I have a sense of what it looked like, obviously in the last 10 years or so, but I'm curious, how was it at that point? What was the street level crime looking like? What was the experience of moving around in Northwest, near where all the seats of power are?
There was a lot of homeless during that time, homeless families, homeless children. In fact, I was a volunteer for Hill Staffers for the Hungry and the Homeless. And it was really kind of, that organization didn't do much. I mean, we tried, but like it was really, really dire poverty right around the Hill. Like, I mean, you're talking people living in shacks with no electricity, no running water, and children with bare feet, real poverty. I saw a lot of real bad poverty when I was there. And I noticed that. Maybe some of my friends didn't, they were more into the, social scene, but I was noticing it. When I would go into a restaurant, I would see right outside there was homeless. And this is before other cities, started really seeing a lot of homeless. And I think Washington, D.C. was one of the first places that you really saw greater numbers. And so you already saw the economic divide happening in D.C. And then you saw, of course, the people that are in their bubbles, they don't even notice the poverty around them, the very wealthy and the diplomats and whatnot that live in their bubbles, right? And, as far as, the atmosphere for women, it was changing, but it was still, we were very objectified, or at least I was to an extent. And there was a lot of, bad behavior, if you will, on the Hill. And some women participated in that themselves and some didn't want to. And so the ones that didn't want to didn't last long, right? But I would say that there was a lot of that kind of behavior and, objectification.
Can you get specific about what we're talking about, bad behavior? I don't have to have names per se, but I'm curious of examples of what we're talking about, whether it's liaisons or parties, whatever, but like, so people get an idea, because you're giving people a look behind something that they don't ever get to experience.
Yeah.
They suspect it, I think. But
when I was at Thompson Mirkwood Hall, at one point I brought my car out from California. Being a Californian, I took the Metro, but we love our cars, you know how we are. So I was like often the designated driver because I didn't really drink. And if we went far out, I was like the person that would drive or pick up someone that was in a bad situation. And I got a call, and we had beepers back then, by the way. This is old. So
I know, I was just thinking, everyone's thinking of Ubers, but there's no Ubers. There's taxi cab only. There's the Metro.
No, cell phones weren't as common with that. So then I went out, and there was a young girl who was in the hallway, who was in the hall with me, that residence. And she called hysterical, crying, drunk, whatever. And when I got a hold of her, and she was at a payphone and in the middle of nowhere, and it was like really late at night. I woke up my other friend from the other room and said, you're coming with me and we're going to go get her. And I don't want to say her name, but she had a consensual affair with a very prominent Republican senator. And I won't say his name right now. It's in my book. And I allude to it. Someday I'll reveal who it was, but very prominent, you'd know the name. And he had an affair with her, and she was totally enthralled and thought he was going to leave his wife and be with her. And she's like 22. She was younger than me. And she was crying, drunk. Her stockings were all torn. She had made a scene, and he dumped her off just in the middle of somewhere in Virginia, just like on the side of the road, and dumped her. And so I took her, we took her in, and I was like, the whole time I was sort of sympathetic, but then also I was hoping she wouldn't barf in the car. I was having those thoughts that we do when we're getting our friends out of messes. And the next day, you know, she was really, really heartbroken. I didn't really even realize, I just thought she was drunk until later, how heartbroken she was. And I was walking down the hall, and this young staffer walked up to me and he said, "Good job. Thanks for that." And I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Cleaning up that mess." And then he walked away. And I was like, oh my God, I'm part of the problem. Yeah, I'm part of the problem. Yeah. So she ended up going back to her home state and not returning. And she was a very young intern who fell in love with, you know, her boss, I guess, and had sexual relations, and he dumped her on the side of the road. So
can you talk about, so this is totally foreign to me. So I'm both curious, but also a little bit horrified by it. There is a culture of women that are very attracted to particularly unattractive men who have power that are much older than them. Can you talk about it, especially because it sounds like you were kind of a dispassionate observer? And I'd love to hear your response on just seeing some of your younger colleagues, young, pretty, idealistic, you know, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, there were many like that that thought, I mean, you have to remember at the time period in the 90s, there's still this thought or traditional theory that women were to get married and have babies, and that powerful men were the way you go. It's almost like biological, right? They go for the biggest wingspan and the birds, and in this case, they're going for the most power. I look at it dispassionately, probably because I was estranged from my father for most of my life, so I didn't have what you would call daddy issues. I didn't idolize a daddy, and I didn't think I needed one, if you know what I mean saying. So I just wanted a partner. I wanted I wanted a guy who was equal to me and could handle me, but I didn't want necessarily, in fact, all the men I dated were my age or even a little younger. So I didn't want an older dude. That's just me. I just didn't find them attractive. And, but some of my friends did, and they just did. They found that alluring, maybe the way they dressed, maybe the way, whatever it was that attracted them. It's always been a mystery to me. But they did. There were several that were just what you're saying. They were actually doing a job, kind of hunting for a husband or a powerful lover that could take them to the next level, rather than just relying on their own skills, which is kind of sad.
Well, I'm reflecting on this sort of cultural phenomenon. And Pretty Woman was released in 1990, the famous Julia Roberts movie with Richard Gere. And in a lot of ways, I see a lot of the parallels there. You know, he's rich, he's powerful, he's kind of dashing, he's got gray hair, even at a younger age, you know, and she's young and
gentleman.
Right.
Yeah.
And there is that phenomenon. That was kind of an archetype or a mythology that existed in the 90s, maybe, you know, and that is kind of a throwback thing. I mean, it's almost vintage 50s kind of thing where women were looking for that kind of hero, but it wasn't a knight in shining armor. Think about, what was it, Bonnie Tyler that did I Need a Hero, right? It was the same kind of time. And so that's what we're describing. And I just want people to get into that mindset, because it is so different than 20 plus years, 30 years from now.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, they would make jokes in front of us about sex or whatever, or like they would tell us, you know, to go get the beer, go get the wine, bring it to the, you know, I remember carrying cases of beer up to Panetta's office for the other staffers. He wasn't doing that, but it was his, you know, staff. And they'd make jokes about, they'd go through like the resumes and like try to, you know, and joke about what the women looked like. I mean, it's just, you know, and some of it I didn't, you know, I grew up with brothers. So I grew up with 3 brothers, and I didn't have a sister to you know, so I know how men behave, and I didn't think too much of that. Like I don't like the word feminist, but I wasn't like a hardcore feminist, but I did want to be appreciated for my intellectual abilities and my skills and my analytical skills. And that definitely wasn't happening when I was 27, 28 years old. So no.
All right. You mentioned earlier, predators weren't on the streets. They were in the halls of Congress. Let's go there and kind of dig into that a little bit. We talked about the culture now. You had a very unique experience with that, and I know some people have asked questions about it. You and I have talked about it. Let's lay it out for people what the allegation was, what the, you know, so they can make up their own mind about your story.
Sure. Yeah, you know, well, it started off like this. You know, I didn't have any kind of rapport or relationship with Joe Biden. I met him I was a low-level staffer, so I had, a little bit of contact with him, but not a lot. He was there daily, on and off, and sometimes he'd be traveling. There would be like a whole week I wouldn't see him, whatever. And there'd be other times where I'd see him 2 or 3 times in a day. It just depended. I wouldn't necessarily interact with him. It wasn't like a flirtation or a relationship like you heard about, like with Monica Lewinsky or some of those things. Nothing like that.
Sure.
At all. And so I thought of him, this office, not so much him per se, but the office as like a mentoring place where then I would make, my next move. Like I would work here for a while and then move up. And that quickly changed. The reality of that. He started making, like when I would see him at a meeting, he would put his hands on me, his hands on my shoulder, and then he would rub my neck underneath my hair with his thumb. And he would just put, he just didn't have any kind of sense of space for people. And Boundaries. It was really unusual. No boundaries. Yeah. And we didn't really use the vernacular back then like that. It was just, It was odd. I just remember being like, God, okay. Panetta never did anything like that. Like, I can't even imagine him doing anything like that. So I only had that to compare to, right? Mm-hmm. So then he kept doing things like that at different times. And then there was an incident where I walked in to where Marianne was sitting, and there was an argument between Genevieve Cullen, one of the staffers, and her, and another staffer, Tracy, who was the assistant to Marianne. And they were all arguing about the fact that Joe Biden wanted to have me serve drinks because he liked my legs and he thought I was pretty. And,
hold on. So who's having this argument? These are two women discussing what Joe Biden had said to them?
Right. And so Genevieve was sticking up for me, and she turned to me and she was like in the heat of it. And she goes, Tara, you don't have to do that. That's not your job. And I'm like, okay. And it was like one of those moments where, and then everyone kind of looked at me. I was like, there's nothing I can say that's going to be right. Anything I say is going to be wrong in this moment. And I just kind of froze. And Marianne said, she gave me a look, like she had this way of giving you a look, like when she was trying to get you to do what you're supposed to do. She was my supervisor. Right. And so I just stayed quiet. And then, Genevieve talked to me by myself. And then Marianne took me in the hallway and she said, you've got to just keep your head down and, you go along to get along, the kind of pep talk, right? Like this is, you should take this as a compliment, like he noticed you and you should, whatever.
And you're what, 28 years old?
It starts off like this. I'm sorry?
You're about 28 at the time? Is that?
Yes, 27.
What about this picture that we're flashing up on the screen you sent over? What age was that, you think?
That was the same age. It was like, in fact, it was taken a month before I went to Biden's office.
Okay. So just so people, this is the hair. This is what the look is that you've got. This is the era. I'm looking at the clothes. Even the clothes is kind of reminding me of the 90s too. Mm-hmm. And so, and how old is this woman who's your boss that's telling you? What is she? She's
50s.
Okay. 50s. So she's kind of matronly and she's giving you, this is how it works.
This is what you do. Mm-hmm. Then, I went home, of course, talked to my mom, and my mom was furious. And she goes, she labeled it. She goes, that's sexual harassment. That's not okay. And I'd been calling her about him putting his hands on me and feeling like weird, not knowing how to handle it. And it put me in a weird situation in the office with other people. It was just a weird thing.
What did mom say? What was she saying? What would your mother say about that? Because
well, she was furious. She said I needed to make a complaint right then. Like she was telling me right then to take action, to put my foot down. So I did, in a sense. I said, no, I'm not going to serve drinks. I didn't want to do it. Marianne was furious with me. We had several, I call them our hall meetings. She would take me out in the hallway and like scold me and tell me everything that I was supposed to be doing. And, my mom was very fierce and very activist. And at this point, I was a little more timid about that kind of thing. Like I was more careful and I really wanted a career. And I was trying not to make this a huge deal. I just wanted it to go away, right? I just thought if I just am quiet, it'll just go away. But then by refusing, that sort of sent a message. And then things got really icy in the office. And so I went to talk to the chief of staff and told him, I didn't like it, and
was this event this event you turned down, was this a specific party of notoriety, or was it just like a Thursday night kind of thing? I mean,
I don't even know what it was. It was like one of those, I remember it as like a fundraising, so offsite. It would have been offsite. I know that. But I remember it's kind of being a fundraising, but I'm not sure. And you're not allowed to have fundraising on the Hill at that point so it was like something that was being done. But they would often have, they'd have staff do things differently than what their rules were. But this was, it's just the way he presented it. It was not okay. So that went by, right? But then things get really frosty. And then all of a sudden I'm being sort of frosted out. But it's the kind of environment where it's all hands on deck. It's not as rigid as it is now, where everyone has their roles. Everybody would have to pitch in to different offices. Like, for instance, I was helping the assistant press secretary. I would go through speeches and do some editing. I would go take notes at a hearing. It was just all hands on deck, that kind of thing. And so I was doing that. I was actually correcting something on the some document or whatever, and I get this frantic, ask from Marianne. She comes running in, which she usually never does, to where I was, and said, "Can you please take this? He forgot it. It was his gym bag, and take it to him." And I remember
him being Joe Biden.
Yes, and yeah, he's him. So yeah, so I had to go. So I go, running after him towards the Capitol. And as I'm going down, I remember I remember flashes. I don't remember exactly where I am. And one of the things that I've been careful about is because every day I worked there and took sometimes different routes, sometimes the same, but it's like trying to remember the exact route I took. But I remember I went downstairs. I remember my shins, I had my heels on. I wasn't wearing, sometimes you'll throw on tennis shoes or different shoes because of the marble floors, because they hurt. But anyway, I remember my shins hurting. I remember that, that distinctly, more of the physical stuff. And going down, chasing him down, basically. And he's ahead of me. I see him. He's talking to someone. They walk away. And then we're in this corridor near the Capitol, because we're going, remember, this is he is coming from the Senate building, from the Russell building. So then, I'm just focused on getting him this gym bag, right? And then going back to what I was supposed to have this document done. And I was really focused on that document. But I was also kind of like, okay, I'm going to see Joe Biden and hand him a gym bag, whatever. And then he said,
was that a remarkable thing for you? At that moment, would that have been a remarkable experience for you in any way?
Well, I mean, not so much, but because I had just seen him at another meeting, and I was already kind of not sure how I felt about him. I was already kind of half liked him and half thought he was there was something off. So I had mixed emotions, let's put it that way.
Is it good to have FaceTime with the senator when you're working in the office at a low level? Is that
it's huge. It's huge. But my interactions low level were kind of weird. So I wasn't sure what this was going to be. And I was right to worry. So anyway, I handed him the gym bag and said, here you go, Senator. I called him Senator. I didn't call him Joe. And he recognized my name. He said my name. And then next thing I knew, and this part is really hard for me to describe, because it wasn't sequential. It was just all at once. I was up against a wall, and I remember the coldness of the wall. And I remember, him being underneath my clothes, underneath my shirt, underneath my skirt. He was just, and, I had absurd thoughts. I thought, where's the gym bag? I remember thinking that, which is an absurd thought, but that's one of my vivid memories. And I think I just didn't want what was happening to be happening. And so he was saying things to me, and I can remember some of it, not all of it. And he was kissing me and leaning in, and it was, and I was trying to pull back, and I remember the smell, and there was a smell that I didn't like. It was like a dry cleaning smell. And even when I talk about it, I get nauseous. There's a particular smell that if I ever smell it, I get immediately ill. But I didn't want him near me. And he was forcing it. And he used his leg to spread my legs. And he was saying he wanted to go he wanted to fuck me. And he said, he got very graphic and he said other things. And
how loud is he speaking?
Oh, he very softly. It was like in my ear. He was kissing me and doing it like in my ear. And that's why it almost sounded in my mind echoey, because it was like right in my ear. Right. Mm-hmm. And kissing me, and I'm pulling away this, like away. And he doesn't seem to be taking those signals. And then he penetrated me with his fingers, and I managed to pull away. And I remember, my whole body was like shaking, because it wasn't just what he was doing, but it was like, he was, it was him, and, he had a lot of power, and it was just really frightening. And I just didn't want to be part of what he was doing. And I was saying no. And, he immediately did this thing that's really disconcerting. He smiles when he's angry, which is very disconcerting.
I think a lot of Americans have seen that recently.
He smiles when he's very angry. And he used to do it like in meetings. If he was pissed off at somebody or somebody pissed him off, he would smile and then say something through his gritted teeth. So anyway, at first he was saying, "Come on, man, I heard you liked me." And then in my mind, I'm thinking, what did I do wrong? How did I get in this position? Immediately, I'm starting to think about like all my behavior. Like, what did I do? How did I get to this, right? To this moment. And then he all of a sudden switched to that smiling and anger, and had his, finger in my face. And he said, "You're nothing. You're nothing to me."
And you're in public, but there's nobody around.
There's no one around at this point yet that I know of. Maybe people were. If they were, I wouldn't even have known. I was like, you know what I mean? I was tunnel vision into what was happening. Sure. And I was shaking. And I remember my legs were shaking so bad, it's almost like I could barely stand. And he, I think, immediately realized he'd gone too far. Because after he said, "You're nothing," a couple of times, and, he took me by the shoulders and he kind of shook me and he said, "You're fine. You're okay. You're fine." And then he took the gym bag and he whisked away and walked away. And I was just standing there, still silent and still trying to like comprehend what had happened. And he was already off and somebody was getting his attention. And I remember I sunk down to these stairs. And these stairs, it's where they have the tall windows. And I remember thinking, it was horrible. I mean, I knew, like, what he did made me feel so gross. Like, it just felt gross. I felt terrible and used. And then on top of it, I knew that was the end of my career. Like, I sat there and I was processing that. So it wasn't just the actual assault, and he, and it hurt. It's not like he was being gentle, right? It was like, our knees clashed. So my knee was hurting. He entered me with his fingers pretty violently. And
this was not something that you were physiologically prepared for.
No. And I couldn't even comprehend it was an assault, but it was an assault. And, but at that time I didn't even think of it in those terms. I was just trying to assimilate it. It was really hard. And I knew in that moment my career was over. Like, it was over. Why did you know that? It's just, I can't, because of how angry he got and because how powerful he was. I just had this moment that I knew my life was forever changed. Like, that was it. It was just sort of this sinking feeling. And
as you sat on the stairs, what was your next move? Where did you go next physically?
I went to the bathroom and cleaned up a bit, and then I got home. And that part, it's so odd. I don't remember going back. I had to have gone back to the office to get my purse, but I don't remember it at all. Like, I just remember the next thing I remember is being home, and I was talking to my mom on the phone, and she was screaming at me, and we got in this huge argument because she wanted me to go right then to the police. Well, before I called her, I had taken a shower, and I had taken a shower, and I'd taken all my clothes, including my shoes, and put them in a garbage bag and took them down to a dumpster. Like, I mean, I didn't even want the shoes I had on. I was just like, I was acting without thinking, if that makes sense. And my mom was trying to, anyway, and the shower thing was like, I couldn't, like, I remember I scrubbing my face because I couldn't get rid of that smell that it just, and my mom was screaming at me to go to the police. And I was like, it's the Capitol Police. You know, they're not going to help me. They're not going to help. You know, they work for the members of Congress. They don't work for us. What I didn't know at that time is that I could have gone to the Metro Police, but probably, you know, it was the 90s. Who knows how they would have treated me? Who knows what would have happened? But I didn't choose to do that. I should have listened to my mother, and I didn't. She begged me. She even started sobbing on the phone after she got mad. And then, you know, but I just wanted her to support me. I didn't want to be told what to do. And so we got into this like really bad argument. So that's how that went. And then within the next day, I had talked to my brother, my little brother. I put it in a little more delicate terms because he was my little brother. So, you know, you don't talk to your little siblings the same way that you do, you know, your parent. And then I told my friend who worked in Kennedy's office, actually, and she's one of my witnesses. She would have testified. She's one of my cooperating witnesses, and she knew what was going on all along, like with Biden and everything. And
this was part of the girl talk that you guys had when you were discussing your work.
Yeah. And then so when I called her when this happened at the next day, and I called her, and she was devastated that happened to me. But we knew what it was, but we didn't say the words. But she didn't think I should go to the police either. You know, she was really worried for me because, you know, people died, you know, like you'd hear about like staffers, like there was someone who, I don't know, there was, you just didn't do that. And then later you heard about what happened to Chandra Levy. That was later after me though, but still, you know, you just, they had too much to lose, these men. And that's why, like, when my friend that I had helped, who was crying, you know, on the side of the road, she was giving ultimatums. And I remember, you know, my friend and I talking to her saying, look, you can't, they have everything to lose. Like, you can't do that. Don't put yourself in that position, put yourself in danger.
I want to just take a thought, just take a beat. One of the things that is staying with me, one of the things that's staying with me is the fact that this is the 90s. There's no internet. And it was probably the last time, and probably will be the last time in recorded history, when people could really go disappear, when things could go without, there were no cell phones tracking your position everywhere. There was no DNA analysis happening for minor crimes, right? This wasn't a thing. This is a totally different world that even people that are my age and older, they remember it, but it's a distant memory in a lot of ways. I mean, it's really hard to process. You just talked about Chandra Levy. I haven't heard that name in forever. That, you know, there was always that weird fear that people in power could do things that maybe they would. There was a public outrage that would happen that we don't have anymore. Like, it's assumed that people are scum today, I think, in so many more ways. Maybe the internet has done that. Maybe the access to pornography, whatever it is, there's been some cheapening in our society and our culture of some of the human dignities. And so it's we're less shocked. But that story would have been truly shocking at that time and would have been really dangerous.
Yeah. And, you know, when I tried to talk about it to my supervisors, because I did complain about the other part, and I was going to get to the part of what he did, I was really shut down. Like they just shut me down, and they didn't, it's almost like they knew something happened. I don't know how, but one thing.
Do you think something like this was discussed behind scenes? Like, hey, this just happened. I just had a bad interaction. You guys are going to have to step on this. Would that have been the kind of culture in the office?
So, you know, my friend thinks that he did it before and that they've had to clean up a lot of messes. That's what my friend thinks. I don't know. I know that if we can unseal those files that are all, you know, sealed at the University of Delaware, that'll be interesting to see what complaints were made, because they're all sealed there.
Why would they have the complaints from the office, like the personnel files? Why would they have those at the?
Because back then they didn't have a protocol like they do now. So all of those complaints went back to the chief of staff, and then the chief of staff chose how to secure records, and Biden's office chose to put it in the University of Delaware and seal it. And so it's out of touch. You can't FOIA it because it's a university.
And this is really pre-normalized HR, human relations type departments. I'm also thinking about the administrative stuff that was going on at that time. And I don't know, was there a big human resources department in the Senate
not
offices?
really. I mean, like, it was pretty disorganized. They called it the Office of Counseling or something. So when I took the paper to make that complaint, it was something called like a counseling office, like this offshoot. It was like going to, this window, and you filled out a form almost like you were going to the dentist or the doctor, right? Like an intake form. And I filled it out, and I did not talk about, I know that I didn't talk about the assault. I talked about, the other stuff. And, I wanted to talk face to face with someone about what happened. And I didn't get no one followed up, no one called. But what was interesting was one of the assistant press secretary who worked with Evelyn Lieberman, who was the press secretary for Joe Biden, knew me. And he actually was dating one of the interns that I hired. So again, like, it's just sort of the atmosphere was just crazy. But anyway, so I'm seeing them out, and we're out actually. And he said matter-of-factly to me when he found out that I had filed this paper, he said, "Tara, we will fucking destroy you."
Direct quote.
Direct quote.
So how do you go back to work in that kind of an environment?
It was pretty hard. In fact, what they did was they made it seem like they turned it around so much, like they made it seem like it was my fault. Like I had these meetings where I was told that I wasn't dressed appropriately and I had to wear longer dresses and not show my cleavage and things like that. And then I was told I was taken, the intern duties were immediately taken from me. I was put into a room with no windows and I was told my job was to get a job. And my supervisor said, "You come to me even if you have to go to the restroom. You don't leave this office."
And that all changed from the time that you filed your complaint.
Oh yeah, that was right after that's all of that, what happened. And then I was applying for other offices, obviously, and no one would even interview me.
That's the blackball feeling. You went from someone saying, "Do your job, go along to get along. You have nice legs, and so therefore you should be delivering drinks at a fundraiser because that's what the big man wants. That's what the guy who's running the office says." To, you need to cover your cleavage and you need to wear longer skirts and sit and ask for permission to go pee. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
What are you feeling at that time?
Pretty classic, retribution and all of that stuff. But it never saw the light of day, right? So I went about my life, and then in 2019, I saw a young politician named Lucy Flores getting torn to pieces by the press because she dared to say she didn't like Joe Biden kissing the top of her head without her permission and putting his hands on her. And, she thought of him as like grandfatherly. She wasn't trying to imply that it was sexual, but it creeped her out, right? And then you had 7 other women that had similar stories. Well, there's even more, and if you dig, there's more. There's a Secret Service person who complained that he would strip down naked in front of her and swim laps, and just the way he did it, probably we can imagine, because I can imagine because I know how he acted. He just thought of women as objects. When he did what he did to me, it's not like there was emotion behind it. I felt like I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time almost, but it was like he wanted pleasure in that moment and I was in front of him and that's what he wanted. That's it. There was no he wasn't trying to woo me. He wasn't trying to have an affair with me. It was just basically, he was trying to, Yeah.
Do you remember that movie Back to the Future?
Oh gosh, vaguely. Yeah. Yeah, I do. With,
right?
What's his name?
Marty McFly. He's wearing the vest. Yes. What is his name? I know he has Parkinson's now. Why can I not think of his name?
Yeah, I can't either. Sorry.
Michael J. Fox. It's Michael J. Fox's,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Great movie. 80s heroism, all this kind of thing. I get this weird sense of watching from the outside, and I don't know if it's real or not, but maybe it's just the stories I've read. Maybe it's from talking to you. I see the bad guy in there, the villain, the bully. His name is Biff. Do you remember Biff?
Yeah. Yeah.
And one of the things that I recall being so upset about when I was a kid watching this was the way that he takes Marty McFly's date, who's actually his mom, right? Because it's Back to the Future. But he takes her out of the dance, and this is that classic bully mentality, and he throws her in the car, and he's going up her very like ruffled poodle dress or whatever it was, and he's reaching and he's putting his hands on her in the car. And that's the classic, like, get your damn hands off her. And, you know, the guy who's getting his arm beaten, you know, hits him in the face. And that's the 80s story of redemption, you know. And yet that bully has been around forever. It's an archetype. And I don't know why I think of Joe Biden in that way in a lot of ways, but the way that he seems to put hands on women and the way that he acts about people and the way that he talks, I'll take somebody out behind the gym, that has always inspired me that. And like I said, I don't know where it comes from, but
on the hot mic, he said a few months ago, he said, no one fucks with a Biden.
Right.
That's
that attitude, though.
That's not the president of the United States. It's like the mafia. Yeah,
I mean, or it's a cartoon bully from a 50s movie, an 80s movie showing throwback.
To me, he seemed very frat boy, frat boy.
Yep.
Okay, like, but the privileged, violent kind, right?
But that is the thing that we see in colleges, like where you think about it, it's like the sexual predator move. It's not like it's about lust, and it's not about excitement or love for somebody or even an attraction to it. It's that's the old thing we used to hear about in the 90s about how sexual assault or rape is about power. Because I can attitude. Right. And you just mentioned, and I heard the way you described it, and I visualized it. I've taken sexual assault interviews from from the receiving end of it as law enforcement and also as a paramedic. And those don't sound like somebody who was figuring out what his move was. That was a guy that knew how to put the moves on somebody. And correct me if I'm wrong. And that's the way you described it to me. That's what I heard. You tell me if I'm not hearing it correctly.
It did seem, looking back in retrospect, in the middle of it, I couldn't really tell. But like looking back, though, the way he immediately kind of put it off on me, like, hey, man, I heard you liked me, like immediately blaming me, like I'm right.
And you said you thought this wasn't the first time it happened. So
I'm
you
sorry?
said you thought that wasn't the first time it happened. And there's a reason why you think that way. But I'm just trying to suss that out.
Yeah, I think he was because I look back at it now, and it was the way he walked away. He didn't look back. He just literally walked away and then went on, and I heard him jovially way down, because you can hear the echoing down the hallway when he met up with someone. It's like it didn't happen. It didn't exist. Like he just it was like an annoyance. Like, okay, that didn't work out. That annoyed my day. Now I'm going to go do this.
Right. Yeah, this could have gone one way, but the day goes another way.
Yeah. Yeah, there was no and now looking back at that, now seeing him actually the way he is now, even though I know that he's different now, he seems much weaker and he seems obviously mentally, like in a decline. But still there's that element of arrogance. It was the arrogance. That's what the word I was trying to look for. Just this arrogance. Like he's above the law. He can do whatever he wants.
Yeah, the word that keeps getting suggested, especially the culture you're talking about, is entitlement. It seems like that's kind of the air of it.
Yeah.
So you're looking for other jobs. You're getting blackballed. You're not getting other options. What do you do?
Well, I was with somebody at that point. I probably wouldn't have gone with him had I not been just assaulted. And, I made a bad choice with my ex-husband that I ended up going with, who he worked for another senator, another Democrat. And we went off together, and I went back to California, and we were married, and I had my daughter, and I worked for Jack O'Connell, who was a state senator. And when I was hired, I, of course, put down the reference because the agreement was they would give me a reference. That was the agreement I had with Ted Kaufman when I left, because, I did have that file. I did get a little pushback a little bit. I should have pushed back much harder, but I did push a bit on Ted Kaufman and had a meeting with him. And so I get hired by Jack O'Connell, right? And before I get hired, though, the chief of staff, Gavin, what's his last name? Gavin, I can't remember his last name. I almost said Gavin Newsom, but that's the governor. Yeah, it was Gavin. I can't remember his last name, but he was the chief of staff there for O'Connell. And he calls me up and he goes, Tara, we were just about to hire you, and then we got a bad reference from Biden's office. And I said, really? I said, could you do me a favor, Gavin? Could you give me 30 minutes? And he said, sure. Okay. And so we hung up, and I called up Dennis Toner, and who was one of my supervisors, and I reamed him out. I lost my temper on the phone, and I said, "You fucking get on that phone and you give him a good reference. I have a baby, and I will blast you. I will, you made an agreement." And anyway, so then I get a call 20 minutes later from O'Connell's office. And they said, "Wow, we just got a call from Joe Biden's office, and they were effusive and apologized and said they didn't remember exactly who we were talking about, and now they do, and went on and gave you a great reference." Wow. And we just decided anybody that can get them to call back with that quickly deserves to be hired. So I got that job.
Well, anyway. And that is a skill set. So well done on that, I guess. Too.
I know. And it's funny because I don't know if it was hormones or what, because I just had a baby, but I was like, "You will fucking give me a good reference." Right. So I got tough.
Yeah. And there is something to be said. You start messing around with a mama bear.
Yeah.
We all know how that goes. That was still in a Democrat's office.
Yes. I was still in a Democrat's office. Still hadn't learned my lesson.
Well, that being said, you spent pretty much most of your adult life, or at least certainly your professional life, working for Democrats. And you mentioned, was it Flores? You said that you heard in 2019?
Yes. And, after that, what I did was because of the situation with my ex-husband, I'd moved to Seattle. We had a very contentious divorce. His rights were terminated with my daughter, and it was pretty abusive. And I ended up getting trained by Seattle Police Department as a victim support person for domestic violence victims. And I ended up going to law school at Seattle U, went to law school, studied international relations, and got back into that geopolitical kind of world that I liked a little bit with those classes. And then also was an expert witness later on for domestic violence victims. And then even testified before the Washington State Legislature to help with laws that would help victims of domestic violence. And that was really gratifying work. I really enjoyed it. And anyway, I was raising my daughter, and then she was, during 2019, she's an adult now, right? At this point, she's an adult. And I see Lucy Flores from Nevada just get torn to pieces along with the other women. They're calling them lunatics and all these names. The Democratic press was just going after them. And I knew what they were doing. They were planting articles, and my friend called me from DC, the one who was a witness. And she said, "Tara, did you see what they said? They said that no former employee of Biden has ever made a complaint against him." And I said, "Yeah, I know, I saw." And she said, "Are you going to do something?" And I said, "Yeah, I probably am." So I did.
Who's telling you this again? This is your friend from that was living in the same dormitory?
No, she was married and, moved on with her life, but she's living in Virginia.
But she was living there at the time.
She was in the DC vicinity. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but she was, we were all there. So we've stayed in touch over the years, even though I went back to California and moved all over, and
sure,
but we stayed in touch. So it was interesting because it was really difficult for me again to come forward. It had never occurred to me to go to the press. I had told people in my life over the years, but I did. And it hit the local press first because I went to just a local newspaper and they published it. And then of course it went to the bigger papers, and I put my toe in the water. I was just so scared. I talked about the harassment, but I didn't get into the sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And finally, I got a hold of Lisa Lehrer from New York Times, and during the summer, and I said, there's something more, and I just have to say it, but I need, I was scared to do it. And she said she got the message and actually was sorry she didn't get it. I had called Ronan Farrow. He didn't get a hold of me. He didn't know. He hadn't gotten the messages. And so anyway, she got back to me eventually. But besides that, I went to Time's Up. And Time's Up is this organization that's supposed to help women who have, coming forward about powerful abusers. And I was really wanting insulation to do this. I wanted a lawyer and I wanted, protection a bit. And so my case was accepted initially. And come to find out that Tina Chen was fundraising for Biden, and I didn't know it. And Hillary Rosen, and who was former Obama, was for, of course, for Biden. And then, they were all working for Joe Biden, basically, and on the payroll. So Knickerbocker, the public relations firm, was actually received millions of dollars, according to FEC, from the Biden campaign during the time I was telling the story to them.
You brought your story to a group that was supposed to protect women from powerful men that had also taken money from a powerful man that you were making an allegation against.
Yeah. So Anita Dunn was running that. And so they never told me about the conflict of interest. And then they said, oh, well, this case is too political. And come to find out, because Ryan Grimm exposed Time's Up, and then later the New York Times finally exposed them, that they were working for Biden the whole time. And they went after the Cuomo survivors, and they went after me. And they literally just strung me along so that they could get all the information from me and who my witnesses were and anything they could extract. And I remember the last thing they said to me was, can you tell us any other names? Can you give us names of other women regarding Biden? Because Biden's campaign was scared. They knew, right? And I didn't, of course. And, now Time's Up has been dismantled for corruption. Right. Yeah.
Do me a favor and walk me back a couple of steps, because you said something that I think will be interesting to folks. You took a job as a domestic violence victim advocate. Did I say it correctly?
Correct.
What drove you to that field, and what sort of knowledge did you gain by doing that work that affected your maybe 2019 decision?
Well, as far as, because I did survive some pretty bad abuse from my ex-husband. And, in our family, my dad was pretty abusive. And the training really helped me understand the dynamic of power and control, which I didn't really understand until that training. I had different kinds of trainings, but when you train with the Seattle Police Department for domestic violence, it's a very specific kind of training. And it also allowed me to look at things more objectively instead of emotionally. So it really gave me that distance to look at things as a bigger picture. So you're not just, reliving your own story or your own kind of bad experience, but you're actually empathizing with other people, trying to help other people, and getting out of your own self, trying to do the bigger picture, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So again, it was kind of like another public service thing, but it was important to me to give back, because I had been helped when I was in domestic violence, and my daughter and I were very much helped, and I was able to go to law school, and work and move on. So I wanted to give that opportunity to others as well. When I saw, and then with the Me Too movement, I thought I had this structure around me to speak out. Whereas before, it never occurred to me to talk about what happened with Biden to the media. I mean, it never even occurred to me. My daughter, I would never, while she was in school, I would never have done that. But also, I just felt like there was no mechanism to do that, if that makes sense. And with the Me Too movement, I felt like, okay, we're talking about this. This happened. I experienced this from a person who's running for office. And you have to recall too, during the time that I came forward, he wasn't the only candidate, and he wasn't necessarily the pick.
Right. There was a whole primary season going on.
Yeah. So I was trying to sound the warning alarm. And I've been trying to sound it for a long time. And I said, this guy's a monster. And he was my monster. And now he's like the whole world's monster and taking us close to World War III. I
want to get into your activism in a middle too, because I think that all plays into your current situation and where you are. I want to dig one more question about the training that you got while you were doing that work. Did you guys discuss the physiological and psychological reactions and the way the body responds to either acute or long-term trauma?
We talked about the cycle of violence. That was more the key and with the cycle of violence is, and I wish we had, if I'd known we were going to talk about this, I would have it. It's a Duluth model, but basically it talks about like when you're in a cycle of violence with someone, an intimate partner, about how, you'll go through like a honeymoon period and everything will seem fine. And then the tension builds and then there's an explosion of violence. So it was like that. Again, these were trainings, but they weren't deep. I've never taken psychology or anything like that. So I can't really speak to that.
I'm curious if you dealt with victims, in close proximity to physical violence with themselves and ever dealt with the shaking. I've heard you mention in every interview I've seen you talk about it. And I'm curious if you know much about what was going on there.
I think personally, I was in shock. But because I felt cold, and I've been in physical shock before from an injury, and it felt like that. It felt very similar, just like that. So I would say it's like that. What I did learn is that victims of domestic violence would be disorganized with their thoughts, with their executive functioning. And I did experience that as well. So there was some similarities there for sure. But, and by executive functioning, I mean, it's like you can do one thing, but you can't do another. I don't know. That's what I mean by that. But
it's focusing on where's the gym bag. Well, you should be trying to figure out how do I get myself out of this place?
And so, it was really beneficial for me. And I would recommend it for anyone who is trying to kind of understand something that happened to them. Because it put it in an objective kind of scientific way, if that makes sense. Like more, you don't feel so isolated or like you're the only person this has ever happened to. And I think people that experience things like that get that isolated feeling. Yes. And so, and back then, we just didn't talk about, I don't even know how to, because you have to remember, I did the training years later. So for many years, I would talk about it once in a while, but in the 90s and following the 90s, the early 2000s, you didn't talk about things like that much. You just didn't. It just wasn't talked about.
Clear. No, I agree.
A lot of secrets kept.
there were, like you said, a lot of secrets kept. There's a, are you familiar with the concept of a sympathetic nervous response, so the so-called fight or flight or freeze syndrome?
Yes. And I would say, looking back, I probably went into freeze mode.
It's the most common.
Yeah.
But it's the physiological background of it. And you learn this as a paramedic, and you learn it if you're somebody who goes into a violent place, where I was trying to go in the military and in law enforcement. There is a significant adrenal dump, and that is when your body sends epinephrine into the bloodstream, and it does vasoconstriction, and it sends all the peripheral vasculature, all of your small blood vessels. They shunt all the blood to the big places they need to be, like your legs, like your arms, things that you could fight, to your heart. And so that's the feeling of cold, is that you lose all the heat. You literally lose heat from your surface level skin, because that's irrelevant. What we need to do is we need to put blood where we can react. And so they go to your eyes, they go to your brain, they go to your heart. And then when you're done with that moment, and your moment has passed, and it doesn't matter if you drew your gun and shot somebody or somebody attacked you, that runoff leaves people with the shakes. It's universal across people that experience a significant event.
Okay. I haven't heard it explained like that, but that's interesting. Okay. That explains a lot. Okay.
It's a fundamentally, like, it's a dinosaur brain human reaction
Reptilian
to a significant
brain.
threat.
Okay. There you have it. Yeah. And it's interesting because, like, there are things I don't remember and things I do vividly. And so that really frustrated me. And I was reading other trauma, professors recently, like after I came forward, actually, there was a trauma professor that explained to me about why, because I was so frustrated. I was trying to remember this one portion of what happened. And no matter how hard I try, I can't. It's a blank. And I try and try and try. And they said, that's like a trauma response. Like, there's parts probably that are blanked out. It's just blanked out.
Yeah, I also think a lot of times because I've taken these notes, you have somebody something happen, whether it's a car accident or an attack, and you're trying to document like what happened next. It's almost like the camera was pointed in a different direction, because your attention was, how do I get out of these shoes, because my feet are hurting right now and my shins hurt. But you're not able to focus on the thing that is happening directly to you, because that is too much for the brain to process. So it goes to these, like you said, the executive functions are very confused and muddled. It's very common. And it's across all types of trauma. It doesn't matter if it's sexual or otherwise. So,
and it's interesting because, looking back, Joe Biden was just very relaxed almost.
That's the predatory piece of it.
And that's what was kind of chilling, is that was like confrontation almost, because I was pulling away and like fighting it. Right. And he's casual. I don't know. It's just like at the time I didn't think too much of it. Now looking back at it, I'm like, oh wow, like that's why I think he's done it. He did it before me and he did it after me, and he doesn't think anything of it. And I think the behavior that I've heard about his son is indicative of being a child of a predator, right? Like he's been modeled to, but I wanted to touch on something you said, parasympathetic system. That is interesting. The parasympathetic.
So there's two sides to it. There's the sympathetic is the reaction where you actually are experiencing that fight or flight. The parasympathetic is the opposite. It's when you relax and you go the other way. These are conflicting systems.
Right. What I was going to say is that part of healing trauma, like one of the things that I like is horses. Mm-hmm. And what they've learned about trauma, because I've had other things happen to me that were actually almost worse than what happened with Biden, believe it or not. And what they said about PTSD is that somatic healing is really important, that talk therapy doesn't really work. And so that's why, equine therapy is really good and things like that. And, focusing forward, I think that's, a really beneficial thing for people that have had something, horrific happen like what I did. But it wasn't just what happened. It was the loss of the mentor. It was the loss of the career. It was the loss of my standing in my community. It was it was a betrayal, and then that went on, right? So then I come forward and I'm thinking I'm doing a public service. It's like a whistleblowing in a way, right? Except it's about a personal situation. And, the media just goes after me, like jackals.
Yeah, talk about that. Obviously, you didn't know you were going up against a multi-million-dollar PR firm that was already in the know. But how was it received for people who can't remember 3 years back? I remember hearing the allegation. I didn't pay attention to a whole lot of it. I didn't have interactions with you at the time. I just went like, okay, that's a story. And, we listen to the story and then you try to figure out if it's credible or not. The media did their own thing. They did something different.
Oh, they attacked me. Beth Reinhardt, Pulitzer Prize winner, right? Reporter. She was my first interview with the Washington Post. And she said, the first thing she said out of her mouth, and I wrote about this in my book, she goes, Tara, don't you realize that this is going to hurt Joe Biden's campaign? Because like she's trying to speak to me like I'm some Democrat, like my allegation, right? And then she goes into talking about the allegation, when she's interviewing me, trying to get me to give her the details. And she's like, would stop and interrupt me and goes, so it was really gross. She said, so did he touch your clitoris? Did you get pleasure from that? I mean, these are the kinds of questions a Pulitzer Prize winner reporter asked me. She had me down in tears. Like I was literally, by the end of the interview, I was in tears and I was sick.
Why do you think she did that?
Awful. She just attacked me. Like, in other words, she was implying like, even if you did it, you probably liked it. It was just awful. It was probably one of the most ugly things I've ever been through.
And how did that compare to the others that talked to you?
Well, they were equally horrible, but not as graphic. But, Lisa Lair was more earn your trust, earn the trust, and then betray. That was her thing, and then do the hit piece. And they made it all about the fact that I was a Russian asset. Because that's when the Russian agent, everybody who wasn't agreeing with Democrats was a Russian agent. That's when that was rolling out against Donald Trump, against any Republican. It was ridiculous. And so, of course, Lisa Lair even said when they approached the Biden campaign, the only thing he did was the campaign faxed back. They wouldn't answer about the assault. They would fax back something saying that I was something about one of my posts that I made about Russia that was positive, implying I was a Russian agent. So it was just stupid. So it was a way to just distract the whole conversation.
What was the allegation that was made that tied you to Russia?
Because I publicly had spoken out about a couple of specific things. I said that Biden, if he were elected, would take us to war with Russia. And I said that in 2019. And he did. But anyway, but at that time, nobody was going to hear that. right? That was a conspiracy theory, or whatever. And I said positive things about Vladimir Putin because I said, I think he's a good leader. He simply takes care of his people. That's all it took, basically. I had said I was writing a novel about Russia and America, and I was writing about something from the Cold War up through to the current time. And I was trying to, because the Russophobia was kind of coming up, and I was writing it from a geopolitical kind of sense, but it was a novel. So I was in the middle of writing that. And they pulled a bunch of the pieces of the novel that were, posted in a writing group that I was in, and made it seem like I was somehow tied to the Russian government.
And,
so
and were you?
No, niet.
Niet, she says. When you were growing up, tell me about your impression of Russia from the childhood and
it's
onward.
Interesting. My cousin, actually, I have a cousin that's Russian, so by marriage, and so it was always very positive. I didn't, we were taught in school. I'm too young, to be under the desk. Like, I know people older than me had to practice, nuclear war and stuff. That was before my time. But for me, it was just sort of the rhetoric. We were told basically that America won World War II. And it's Leningrad didn't even exist. The whole stand against, and all the losses that the Soviet Union suffered.
Touch on that just for a second, because I always like to give people a little bit of history, and I think people don't have a good concept of the number of losses the Soviets had during World War II.
27 million, yeah.
Including civilians, right?
Yeah.
I think close to 20, 19 or 20 million in uniform, something like that.
Right. It was a third of the country was dust, it was burned. Yeah.
And do you know how many in the Allied side lost their lives?
No. Mm-mm.
It's 500,000 United States, 500,000 Great Britain. Yeah. So just the losses were 20x plus for the Russians and the Soviets at that time. People don't have that concept.
John Kennedy gave that eloquent quote where he said, we owe the Soviet Union a debt we can never repay.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. So yeah, I was kind of grew up with the Cold War mentality, although my mother, remember my great grandmother was a communist, and followed Jack Reade. She was into women's right to vote. They were into different thinking, intellectual thinking. So I was exposed to Karl Marx. When I was a little girl, I brought a book of Karl Marx to school, and we had this stump out in Wisconsin. It was this little red schoolhouse. And we would take turns getting on the stump, doing different things, talking, singing, reading, playing, whatever. We were all, little, whatever. And so I had my Karl Marx book for my big brothers. And I was explaining it. God knows how I explained it at 8 years old, because that probably would have been, I wish I had a recording of it, because God knows what I said. But it was enough to where the kids went home and talked about it, and about how maybe there wasn't a God, and that maybe Karl Marx and all this other stuff, and I come from a Catholic background. A lot of the kids there in Wisconsin are Lutheran. And it was funny because
I can only imagine how this went over.
My parents got a call, and they said they had to go in, and my mom had to go in, and they said, Tara is showing some leadership qualities, and we like that, but we need to figure out a different thing for her, and she can't bring her Karl Marx book to the school.
Because she might be organizing a revolt, a Marxist revolt, and they might be moving around the means of production for education.
Well, check this out. So this is what they did. They made me a bus patrol, and I got to wear the orange sash with the badge. Mm-hmm. Turned into a total fascist. I loved it. I was going after, the older boys that would pick on people.
They gave you a little bit of authority. It went straight to your head, and you became a fascist.
I went from Marxism to fascism just like that, like a typical Democrat, right?
Like it can happen to anybody given the right amount of power and the wrong kind of ideas. Huh?
I know. So I got to sit at the front of the bus with my orange sash. So
and tell people what to do.
That's all they had to do is give me my uniform.
It's so good. Oh, that's very, very funny. All right. So from Marxism to fascism, that'll be your next book. You have written one book about your story, and I think it plays into why you are where you are, if I understand correctly. obviously you got torn apart in the mainstream press here. You were not received the way you expected. I think that is pretty evident. And you went from being someone who, in theory, had some alliances, probably historically, to the Democrat Party. Who received you? Did anyone receive you well? Did anyone take your story and say, we believe you?
Behind the scenes, right? But they won't say it publicly. So that was really frustrating. Like,
you want to name any names?
Oh, yeah. Like Chris Wallace, right?
Okay.
Said his
Formerly
wife
of Fox,
was
now at what? Now he's at what, CNN
yeah.
Plus?
Said his wife was groped by him when Joe Biden was the vice president. And I don't mind saying it because, you know, they should be talking about this. He's a media person. He should be telling the truth. And it's bullshit that I have to stand out here on my own. And, you know, but yeah, he had that problem. Now you had that Senator Brown just came forward about his wife getting groped and that he was going to kick the shit out of Biden is what he told him, right? So
wait, I didn't hear that one. Tell that story if you would.
Well, I don't really know it personally. I just know it's been in the media just last few days, and of course only in the conservative media. They're not.
That's what I'm getting at. Sure.
Yeah, but Brown was a Democrat, a friend of Joe Biden's, and basically said those words, said, I will kick the shit out of you if you do that again. But he was groped his wife. He had his hand all over her ass, basically, at a function where there's cameras or whatever. And he groped her and he didn't like it. He defended his wife.
Yeah.
So.
Well, luckily he didn't. Was this, I wonder how recently that was. Was that something that just happened?
He did mention that there was mental decline, so it must have been recently.
Interesting.
Look up that article with Brown though. He's a former representative, and you have a lot of people that are coming forward as far as behind the scenes, Democrats coming to me. No, not a word. In fact, I wrote before I went public. I wrote to Bernie Sanders. I wrote to Elizabeth Warren. Okay. I wrote to AOC. I wrote to Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein because they were in my districts, in California at that time. And silence.
No Christine Blasey Ford reaction?
No response at all, except Elizabeth Warren sent me back a fundraising letter. So they got donate.
It.
To donate. But it was a form letter. But yeah, no. And, it's not like I was just someone random. I mean, I was a staffer and they could see that I was a staffer. So yeah. They just chose to ignore it.
Let's talk about a word that has been thrown around quite a bit. I'm trying to see if I have there it is. There's the definition of it. This is coming from Wikipedia. The word defection. Defection is when a person leaves their home country in a way that the home country claims to be illegal. To the first country, they can be seen as a traitor. It is a political label used by authoritarian countries. This is from left-leaning Wikipedia. I just pulled that up before we started talking. People have said that you have defected. You are now in Moscow.
I am now in Moscow, Russia. Yes. Defected, also usually is used in terms of like military or, someone who is working, in that capacity. Yep. And I'm not that. So there it is, defecting. Yeah.
Right. When I was younger, defectors were people who were flying like a MiG-28 and they decided to leave Cuba and land in Florida airspace, put it down on the tarmac and claim asylum, real asylum, and say, I am defecting to the United States. I'm bringing whatever I have and you can have my plane. Right.
Right.
That's the recollection I have of that word. I've never heard it used for someone.
It's more of like if you're in a military conflict. Russia's not supposed to be our enemy right now, officially. Right. Have we declared war officially? No. Not
that I've seen, although we seem to be doing a multi-billion-dollar proxy.
Yeah, we're doing a multi-billion-dollar proxy. But my point is that, it's an odd term. But yeah, so I'm really lucky that I was able to not be taken into custody because I think the next phase, because of how loud I continued to be about Joe Biden and kept pressing the issue. And then I was about to testify before Congress, Yeah,
let's set the stage for this. There are two things that I think that were going on. One, you were speaking out about Joe Biden, and I've heard that. And many people will not know that you had a pretty strong anti-war position that you were speaking out about. Is that correct?
Very much. Mm-hmm.
talk about your anti-war activism and whether you think that was playing into any of the, we always talk about potentiation, like one thing makes another thing worse, if you think that was involved.
Well, I really chose because my platform was small, right? But I had a little one, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to use this for something. And, and I don't think of myself as a victim, right? I don't like that. I chose to look at this in a different way. This happened a long time ago. It was wrong. It's never been investigated. It should have been. And it cost me my career. That was wrong. And so I wanted to make it so that no one else had to suffer that. That's how I wanted to approach it. I didn't want to get into the whole victim space and get into all of that. I simply wanted to tell the truth and get something close to justice. And when it became obvious that wasn't going to happen, I decided, okay, I have this little platform. What can I do with it? Well, the bigger issue became very quickly, early on in the administration for Biden, was the proxy war. And so I decided, and all the Russophobia stuff, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to push back on this. I'm going to use my voice to push back on this and align myself with other people who are pushing back on this, other anti-imperialist voices, like the Gray Zone, like antiwar.com, and like, frankly, some of the libertarian and conservative voices in Tucker Carlson. I was on Tucker Carlson's show 3 times. One of those times, of course, I was talking about, what happened. But then the other 2, I was talking about something totally different. And one of them I got to speak at the Rage Against the War Machine, and we had libertarians, Republicans, and some lefties. You had people from all over the political spectrum all saying the same thing: quit sending our tax money over to this country and having a proxy war when we need infrastructure at home, when we need homes for 600,000 people, when we need, inflation to go down. Now, I know me talking about inflation is going to make the CIA very angry, because they said that in USA Today. They were a former CIA agent saw me complaining, he said, about the US. That made him viscerally angry.
Can you pull up the picture from the USA Today, Ryan? I know we sent that article over.
Yeah.
Makes the CIA mad for you to talk about the money. There it is.
Yeah.
Biden accuser Tara Reade bolts. That's a good one.
Bolts.
Yeah, that's what happened. And says she fears for her safety. So you're speaking out about the war effort. That's a pretty traditional lefty cause, I would say. Let's give peace a chance. That was always the chant in the 60s and the 70s, right? You said you had a brother who was a conscientious objector. That sounds like that was kind of mom's ethos. That was definitely in your house. I'm putting words into your mouth, but stop me anytime. And then now you still have that.
My dad was not.
Well, that's the other thing. If your dad was more conservative and was more aligned with the establishment, that was always kind of a right-wing position. It's like, yeah, bombs cost money and money equals jobs, and those are all good things. So war is a good business, and right? Yep. I mean, people always accuse the Republicans of being war hawks.
Yeah. So now I was aligning myself with a lot of Republicans. And if you notice, Donald Trump, I didn't vote for him, but he didn't get us close to war.
Yeah. What do you think about that? You weren't a Donald Trump voter.
No, I wasn't.
What do you think about the guy looking from the outside, looking from Moscow? What do you think about Donald Trump in the last, let's say, 7 years that you've seen when you didn't vote for him?
Oh, I think what I saw was that he obviously did a better job than Joe Biden is doing. Okay, economically, just from an objective point of view, he got us out of wars, not into wars. And he, was fighting the whole time against a bureaucracy that wanted him out and was persecuting him and accusing him of ties to Russia, which he didn't have. And that was proven that didn't exist. And it was all, something that was manufactured by Democrats, to maintain power and to get him out. And, it also kind of solidified for me in my mind how much power people like Anthony Blinken and Victoria Nuland and, John Kirby and people like that have. The bureaucrats behind the scenes are the ones running the show with the military industrial complex. And now they're going after, Donald Trump is the political opposition and they're taking him out. Okay, so let's look at this. They're taking out the political opposition. It's been shown that they've been weaponizing the DOJ and the FBI in social media and other things to go after US citizens that aren't for this proxy war or that maybe want to vote for Donald Trump. And you have agencies going after people with religious beliefs. Does that sound like a democracy?
Well, I know we have a republic, and it doesn't sound very much like a democratic republic in any way.
No, it doesn't sound like a democratic republic.
So
And
I
it
tweeted
doesn't-
something.
No.
I shared something the other day. I said the country I grew up in would have invaded the country that I live in. What do you think about that idea?
I think that's a really interesting quote, because I think you're right. And, you know, and we're coming to the point where I talk about why I left. And, you know, it wasn't, I was actually coming to Moscow, Russia because of this book. And I have an interpreter, and I was coming in person to oversee it. And I packed for 1 week. And let me tell you, I mean, people have like said, oh, you planned or whatever. No, I didn't. In fact, I didn't say, there's a lot of regrets I have. I didn't say, if I had known what was going to happen, I would have said goodbye differently. I would have spent my last few days differently. I would have packed differently. But I didn't. I packed for a week and thought I was coming right back. And, you know, and it became clear, it was becoming clear. I was getting a lot of death threats during that time. I was getting nervous. I reached out to you, Kyle, as a matter of fact, remember?
Yeah, I remember you calling me and asking me a question that I couldn't answer, and I would have no way to know. And I thought, oh my God, this poor woman. Like, I remember thinking, like, I have no way to help you. You also called me right in the middle of some really chaotic times on our end. And I thought, it's everywhere. And, you know, you can only fight so many battles at once. But as I recall, you asked me, is there an open FBI case on me at the time? Is that about right?
Yeah. I wanted to know. And I did get an answer to that question elsewhere, but what it turned out to be is that, you know, as far as like, I don't know all the details of what is going on. I know there's a sealed indictment. I know that I had gotten a message that there was red notices, Interpol red notices, which are, it's an international red notice where they'll arrest you at that airport. So I had, you know, you can't go to Moscow directly. You have to go through Istanbul, Turkey or Dubai. And so I had gone through Istanbul, Turkey into Moscow. Mm-hmm. And so we've now like put out, requests to see if I had the red notice, like what countries those Interpol notices are and things like that.
These are international arrest warrants.
Right. And what I've been told, or what's assumed, is that there was something about, I want to get this right, FARA, which is the Foreign Registration Act. And that's like the backdoor into the Espionage Act, and conspiracy and possibly violation of sanctions. So it was like a little bit of a laundry list of things coming my way. And it would have allowed them, while they were sorting it out, the US can hold you for 18 months without charges, and they can hold you in foreign prisons that long. Like, for instance, if I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and they had a red notice, they could just hold me for months there.
In a Turkish prison.
Yep.
I don't know on it. So if somebody thinks,
I have a human rights attorney, so that's
right. And that's the other thing. I know you have people that are working on your behalf that are concerned about this kind of thing. Folks, if you have some different experience and it's professional and it's going to be constructive, put it in the comments below. By all means, we'll always read those kind of things, especially if it takes off the heat off someone. Okay, so you packed for a 1 week trip to go and do a translation of a book. Can we throw the book on the screen for a second here? Tell us what drove you to write the book.
The Left Out When the Truth Doesn't Fit In was actually published in 2020. And it was about what happened and the media out, you know, how they really basically crushed me and social media, you know, with bots and Democratic bots and things like that. Went after my family. I mean, they went after my family, my friends, everything. And so I write about that in the book, a little bit about my childhood, about the event itself, and I even write about Russia and being accused of being a Russian agent in that book. And so I was adding a chapter to the book through this company here, the international publishing company in Moscow, and they were translating it into Russian. And so while I was overseeing that, then, you know, it became clear that I might not be able to, if I went home, I could have been facing, you know, years in jail. And in the middle of all of this, I had been talking to Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene about testifying before Congress. I'd had a long interview with them.
Did they reach out to you or did you reach to them?
they reached out to me, and they were going to, and you can see on Twitter, if you look through the history, you can see some of the comments that Matt Gaetz gave. He believed me and supported me, and he still does. But I'm in Moscow, Russia, so it's like, whatever. But
you're kind of untouchable in some ways now.
Yes. But I reached out to his legal counsel and to him, and when I was in Moscow, because they wanted me to come to DC, and I didn't go, obviously. I stayed in Russia, but I called him, and he was one of the reasons why I stayed, not the whole reason. He didn't give me advice. He just simply gave me information. And I'm glad he gave me honest information. He gave me an honest take on it. He just said, Tara, I'm worried for your physical safety. I know how these people operate, and he was not just talking about the legal stuff. I had gotten a lot of threats on my life. And remember, Matt Gaetz is close to, the intelligence community. So I think he had, he knows like how dangerous it is for whistleblowers and witnesses. And he was concerned for my safety and told me that. And he basically said, as far as the legal stuff goes, he couldn't, there was no way they could protect me from that. There's no way.
DOJ does what it does. Is this an appropriate time to play the Kirby video that we have?
Yeah. And then
set up the video and where you were when you received it, if you would, and I'll have Ryan play it when you say so.
So I gave a press conference in Russia, and I explained why I was asking for asylum in Russia, because I wanted people to know that I was being intimidated and being kept from testifying against Biden. And then apparently John Kirby decided that he needed to give a press conference and talk about it. So here it is.
Tara Reade, who was an aide to then Senator Biden back in the 90s, and then in 2020 accused him of sexual assault. She announced yesterday she's seeking citizenship in Russia, and she feels safer there. Does the White House have any reaction to that announcement, given the accusations that she's made against President Biden?
I think we'd be loath to comment on the musings of a potential Russian citizen. That's really up for her to speak to.
Does the White House believe that her allegations may have been motivated by her allegiance to, affinity for Russia?
Difficult to say. I can't get inside her head and speak for her motivations and intentions. That's really for her to speak to. The one thing I will say is that the allegations that her life was at risk by the United States government, absolutely false, baseless. There's nothing to that.
What do you think when you see
Absolutely
that?
false. Yeah.
Well, he said it, so it must be true, right?
Yeah, I kind of took it like opposite world. Like when he says you're safe, you're not safe. Because he says a lot of things, right? He's, the head of the NSA. So
where were you when you saw that video first?
I was in Russia. So I watched it, and I was having, those ambivalent feelings like, well, maybe I can go back. And then I saw that and I was like, oh, okay, no. And he gave two, by the way. That was one of them. He gave another set of comments too. So he was pretty, anyway, my lawyer said, I think I made the NSA mad. So.
Oh, well done.
So apparently they had different plans, and I didn't follow the.
Yeah, you weren't following what they expected. Well, here's the thing that we found, and I think that you and I share this, is that they have there's an expectation of what you will do, and there's a playbook that people do, because that's how the success has been achieved in stifling stories from going public, whatever those stories may be. And when you go outside of the boundaries, when you color outside of the lines, it upsets them, and also it makes them do things that they don't know what to do with you, and it gives you at least a little bit of wiggle room. And I'm very appreciative that you're sharing your story here with us, because I think that people should hear it. I hope there's some more journalists that will look into it and follow up on some of the allegations on there for what it's worth. I know you sat down with Tucker 3 times. He brought up your story. Obviously, you have some private moments when you guys, because you were in person doing the interviews, right? How did he receive you?
He was very warm. Like at first, he was like, didn't know what to make of me. And then after talking to me afterwards, he became very warm. He gave me his phone number. He said he believed me and he wanted to talk to me more. And he, because we had like a 3.5 hour conversation, an hour ended up, hour and a half or whatever ended up in the interview. But he and I saw eye to eye on a lot of things. He's very anti-imperialist. He's a libertarian. And I think there's parts of me that are very libertarian too. So we kind of bonded on those political belief systems. I didn't anticipate at the time, that he would be fired. And, now he can have his own platform. He'll do his own thing. He'll be fine. But still, he was doing such great work. I'm really shocked, although I shouldn't be, but I still am, that he was, removed. But he was also open to hearing about Russia, and I have to say, Kyle, I think that what people don't understand in America is that there's a lot of propaganda to try to keep us from knowing the truth about Russia. And I think it's not just political about, tension. I think what it is they don't want us to know how good the life is here. Their economy is booming despite the sanctions. And it's very clean. It's very efficient city in Moscow. I've been to other cities. I've been to the Caucasus. I've been to St. Petersburg. I've been to Sochi, and I've seen, the countryside. I've taken a train and seen other small towns. Some of them don't have as much as others, but here you see a scene of, this is Red Square near the Kremlin. And you see the
and this is your video. This is video you shot just walking around?
Yeah, just walking around. People are happy and content there. You have a very thriving middle class, and here is from a boat. I took they have boat tours almost every day you can take, and it's a really nice kind of way to see the city.
Where are the homeless people?
You don't see homeless people. And in fact, 80 to 90% of Muscovites own their own apartments and even a dasha. So you're talking young people out of college. It's very easy to own homes.
What is that percentage?
80 to 90% that own it outright. Not a bank owns it. Like I thought that meant a mortgage, but it doesn't. I was wrong. It's outright. This is the subway system that you're seeing here. If you look at it, look how beautiful it is. They look like museums. Each stop's unique and different. And they're always very clean, very efficient. They run every 2 or 3 minutes. You can go anywhere in the city.
Who's playing the music and pooping on the side of the platform?
Well, you know what? There are sometimes musicians, but you'll hear classical music as opposed to other things. And you don't see any kind of that. Like there's nothing like that. And you don't even see a lot of police. That's what's really interesting. It's not like you constantly see police, because you don't. It's just a really well-run city. They're there. I'm sure security's there. Everything's monitored. But again, there's a social net, I think, for people that have struggles. So they have homes and they have basic food needs taken care of, and transportation is cheap. So like workers that have to work across the city, like let's say 30-minute commute or whatever, it's 500 rubles, which is about 50 cents. And that train, like if you miss one, there's one 2 minutes later. And then there's another one 2 minutes later.
Is 550 cents? What was I saying? It's 100 rubles is $1. Is that not what I saw recently?
No, I don't know, but I think it's about 50 cents is how much the subway is. So
Okay.
if I got the denominations wrong, I probably
50
did.
rubles maybe or something.
Terrible at it. I always tip too much, and people are always stopping me. Don't tip that much.
Yeah, I got that when I was in Poland many years ago.
Hmm?
Yeah, I did that in Poland when the money was like water there. We had 4 or 5x. Like your dollar went so much further at that point. And I remember people telling me, no, like I think $13 paid for, meal for 2 people. And then on top of that, it also was like a 50% tip. And people looked at you like you were a rich person acting. And I was like, I'm just trying to be like $13 is not that much money to me, even though I had no money at the time. It was just so little.
Know what? The wages are a little lower in Russia, but the cost of living is so much lower for the people. So they have their transportation pretty well taken care of. Education is paid for. Medical is very cheap. I have to have like something done with the with a MRI thing. An MRI, which is thousands of dollars in the U.S., is $200 in Moscow to pay out of pocket, and most places have insurance, so it's free. And there's a big state system for medical too. I'm not here to say everything's perfect. I'm just here to say, I think we've been kept from knowing how good it is because they're capitalistic. And I see people in their comments, communist, blah, blah, blah. They're not communist at all. This is a very thriving economy of capitalism, but it's not crony capitalism. And that's the difference. And in the US, we're suffering right now under the weight of crony capitalism. So it's very top heavy and nothing in between. And then poverty, it's just poverty. Whereas in Russia, it's growing. It's new. Capitalism is relatively new. And you're seeing a thriving middle class. This is Gorky Park. Gorky Park is one of the big major parks, kind of like Central Park in New York. It's quite beautiful.
It looks like the Queen's Gardens in London.
It's one of the few sections, and there's places where they just let it go wild, and there's wildflowers. Mm-hmm. There's skate park. There's a concert area. There's a huge pond where you can take little boats, and there's swans. I mean, it's a huge park. Like, I only got like one little piece of it. There's parks all over the place. They put a lot of emphasis on greenery in Moscow. And one of the things that I found really striking here is, when you're in New York, there's like this kinetic energy. It's very intense, and you're always kind of on guard. And
it's hectic.
Mm-hmm. It's dangerous. Yeah. Moscow's as big as New York, but it's more relaxed. You have people moving quickly, right? Because people can rent scooters and bikes everywhere. They're everywhere. You just rent them with your app. And everyone's moving really fast. But yet there's a calmness. And like when you're in the parks, you see a lot of families, very traditional families. There's an earnestness. If someone hears me speak English, they run up and they want to talk to me. And there's no animosity. I've not experienced it one time while I've been here. And I've been here now 4 months. So since May 20th, I've been here.
That's gone fast too, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm. So, and there's been no, they don't feel animosity towards Americans. So all of this hatred and vitriol coming from Washington, D.C. is really sad.
Let me throw a mirror image at you. 1980s, we're thinking about Russia in the United States, and we think that it's gray and it's dingy and it's economically depressed, and they're losing the Cold War, and they've lost freedoms, and they have totalitarianism over them, and all the things that we heard. I don't know if they're true or not because I wasn't there, but probably wasn't great. And then we always heard that there was a concentrated effort. You remember? Did we just lose our feed?
No, I heard.
There it is. So do you remember, they were always saying that the Russians, we had the Radio Free Europe movements. We were always trying to broadcast in behind the Iron Curtain. We were trying to let them know that things were better and that you could overthrow the, communist overlords and live freedom. That was the American push. Mm-hmm. And they were, theoretically, the government there of the USSR was trying to stop that. And now I feel like maybe we've switched roles based on what you're saying. I don't know if it's 100% true, but I trust you as a human being. I'm sure your experience is being honest. Have we just swapped places?
I'm wondering. I'm thinking the same thing because what this has been feeling like to me being here, because I didn't really expect it to be this nice, right? I kind of, even though I was pushing back on Russophobia, I still was indoctrinated to think of Russia a certain way. And I had to be here to really experience it, to see wow, this is completely different than what I thought. And they have super modern and, really cool things going on in innovation that we don't have right now in the US. And it's like you said, we switched roles, but it's nostalgic for me of what the 80s were like in America. There was an innocence, there was something different, right? Right now, I feel like the United States is like what the Soviet Union was right before it collapsed. I really am concerned that, and I don't want that to happen to the country that I was born in, but I feel like under Biden, and if it continues and it goes to Gavin Newsom, and they continue with the same path, I think the government is going to collapse. I think that it is collapsing because of the culture and everything. It's become eroded. One thing that about Putin that's interesting is he chose to ban Monsanto and to ban hormones in foods. He was watching the culture, and they say he's anti-LGBT, which isn't true.
I thought he was anti-shirt. He just likes to ride bears. That's what I was under the impression
Right.
of.
But like what the Russian culture is Orthodox Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And so LGBT, they're very concerned about children. And they are very concerned about children. Like you'll go into a bookstore and there are books that are not allowed for children under 18 and they're wrapped a certain way. I mean, they protect their children. They want them to have their innocence.
Like the 80s.
Yeah, and I think that that's okay. Like what's wrong with that? What's wrong with protecting children? They don't need to know everything, right? Like right away. They need to be able to grow and then assimilate things in a natural way. But anyway, back to Monsanto, they don't allow, a lot of the pesticides here and in Europe too. There are certain countries in Europe that also ban them. But he just saw all the illness and all the carcinogens in the food, and he decided to do all that. So that got implemented a few years ago, and you don't have to look for organic food. It's everywhere you go.
I saw the pictures that you sent me. There's not a lot of people that look like American classic obesity, unhealthy looking kind of mom and dads struggling with overweight kids and things like that. I didn't see that. I mean, Ryan can roll some of the footage while you're talking, but you mentioned something about the health of the middle class there. It was kind of impressive to me. We're just looking at people in a city, so maybe that's what people in cities look like. But
No. It's like that. I mean, there are people of all different kinds of sizes, right, and different backgrounds. I mean, Russia's very diverse, actually, with different cultures and different religions and whatnot. But you notice a lot of fit people because they don't have poison in their food. Their food's not poisoned, and you have access to activities. You walk a lot. You have access to gyms. Things are cheaper. And there's not the air of desperation. Like look at if you looked at those footages, you saw the calmness, people going about their business. That was during a time.
Yeah, it kind of freaks me out, to be honest. Like I don't see people, like they look like they're on a movie set maybe.
Yeah. So that's I mean, it's been a real they talk about culture shock. The culture shock has been realizing how bad things are in the US, and that's been hard. And I know that again, it makes the CIA officers mad. Sorry, boys. But it's the truth. They're hiding it from us. They've taken our country into disarray and ruin. And I'm in a country where they're building and they believe in innovation.
I showed a clip from Trading Spaces. Do you remember that movie with Eddie Murphy? It was the 80s movie about Wall Street.
Vaguely. I never saw it though.
Oh, you're not missing a whole lot. I mean, it's just a cutesy movie, but classic Eddie Murphy stuff. And I've been watching 80s movies. I've been watching early 90s movies with my kids. It's like walking back in time. It's like looking at a thing that was calmer. I just watched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This is probably overshare, but I watched. My wife found it for $5. You remember Rick Moranis is in it? Can't remember the name of the female actress, but she's in a lot of movies and she's great.
Yeah.
And the kids are cute. They're sweet, right?
Yeah.
And the story was the mom and the dad had a fight, and she's out and staying at her sister's, and she calls on the phone and she wishes him good luck, honey. And it's not the story of divorce, although that was very common in the 80s and the 90s. We experienced a lot of that. It was, she said, we need to put this family back together. And so that was the message that came out of Hollywood. And in a lot of ways, if people want to look back in time, they can see how much more hopeful it was. Part of it was probably the cocaine in the 80s, but there was a hope that existed, like you just talked about. And I think so many people that are looking for that and are upset about the way America looks right now, I feel like a lot of us are looking for, it's a nostalgia feeling for my childhood, for your childhood, which is to say that end of Cold War era where there was a lot of possibilities. And there's a big sadness when it's gone because it feels like we lost something really important and our kids are not going to get it. Your daughter just graduated from grad school. I know you called me yesterday to tell me about that.
Yeah.
And she's not going to inherit that same world. She's not walking into the same world that you did.
No, she's walking into a world of a lot of broken people that need a lot of help. And, I have to say, it's been hard to suddenly go to a different country and then ask for safety because I just refuse to go home and be put in a cage or to have, be threatened anymore. So I decided to stay here in Russia. I did apply for asylum. I'm waiting for my final paperwork and citizenship. My dream was to have both, like to go back and forth, right? But I don't know if that'll be possible. I don't know when I'll be able to go back to the United States. So one of the difficult conversations I had to have with my daughter was, I don't know when I'll see her again. And that was a conversation of many tears over the course of many weeks here, but she also is of the mind that I'm safer here and it's better for me to be here. I wasn't going to be, and just, I wasn't allowed to work. I wasn't allowed to function. They were just on me about little things. Now it's taxes, and before it was this or that. And it's just everything, they just come at you with everything. And, when the DOJ gets weaponized like it did. And I think the most important thing for people to do right now is to understand how weaponized our government is against its own citizens. Now, I am everyone, right? Like I could be anyone. They're weaponized against you, Kyle, because you spoke up. They're weaponized against the former president, Donald Trump. Monday, he's going to be maybe put in jail with 19 other people who, it's mind-boggling to me.
I haven't disclosed this on our show before, but we're talking and we're sharing stories. And so I'll share the story. I got a bill for about $10,000 for insurance that I didn't know that I had because the FBI kicked me out of the office. And they said that I owed them back money. I don't intend to pay them that. And then they sent me another bill through email and they said that you owe us $10,000 for the move that we paid for to move you to a job that we canceled you from in New Mexico. And I've been dealing with that on the back end. So you talk about the weaponization and hassling you over little things like taxes.
And that's not a little thing because it's the
administrative
FBI.
bullshit. Yeah, it's over and over again.
Yeah.
It's the FBI, it's the DOJ sending you a bill and saying,
Scary.
We're coming for you. And then they also sent me a letter that said they accused me of 10 different crimes that they were investigating with their internal affairs division because I was an employee, unless I quit, which I did because I don't need them anymore. And honestly, I didn't consider myself an employee there. If they wanted me to break up with them because they broke up with me already, I did the same. And I don't mean to make it about me in this case, but I do think that is the kinship that you and I have.
I broke up with America,
which is what we were talking about yesterday. And I know you called me and you were tearful about it. And we started off and I was like, oh my God, like, I don't even know what to say to you, but here's the questions that I think people are going to have. Were you scared getting on that plane to go there and translate the book? And if not, did something change when you were there?
No, I mean, I was scared about the death threats and stuff like that, but I was excited about seeing Moscow, but I was coming right back. It was like a quick trip. So I didn't have that in my mind. I was more apprehensive about testifying before Congress later on. That was something. Were they going to come after me again? And, the death threats were really concerning me because I had people show up at my daughter's house and try to break in. I mean, there's police reports. My horse was almost stolen back in 2020. And then again, when I was here in Russia. So that's happened. So I had anxiety about that stuff. I'd call it anxiety. But I was excited about going for 1 week to Russia and seeing it finally with my own eyes. And then when it was clear I couldn't go back, that was, and then, but one thing stopped when I was here. I stopped having the panic attacks I was having almost. Like you and I were talking about how scary it is, how you lay at 4 or 5 in the morning wondering if that's the day the knock's going to come. Mm-hmm. That's the day. Is this the day? Is this the day? And it's like you're waiting for that other shoe to drop, because I'd been threatened so many times that the FBI was going to come raid me, or bring me into custody for what? I don't, whatever.
Yeah, your cortisol levels are off the chart. It's like living in a war zone. I mean, it's a psychological war, but it's a war nonetheless.
Yeah, and they went after people I knew. So that Uhuru group, they raided them and then they went after them, and now they took away their passports and they're in prison. They're going to face 8 to 10 years in prison for sowing discord. Right. Which, I mean, shoot, I do that every day.
I feel like you have an American right to sow discord. It's actually part of the First Amendment.
Not anymore. Not according to the recent DOJ. So not under Merrick Garland, not under Biden. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the loss of our liberty, our freedom of expression, our freedom of speech, and our ability to whistleblow, our ability to call out what's wrong and make it better. And I think that's a damn shame. And I really get annoyed when people say I'm not a patriot, because I'm not. First of all, I'm not I've never been like you, Kyle. Okay, I didn't work for the FBI. I wasn't like that. But I did work for the Senate and the Congress, and I took it seriously. And I did like being a public servant, and I do care about my country, and I care about my fellow Americans. I don't like Biden, and I don't like that regime. And it is a regime. They're basically making money off our taxes, and they're laundering it basically. I think about my father. My father's dead. My mother's dead, and we were pretty estranged. But I wonder what he would think about all the military contracts. He probably would have made money, but like, would he have been okay with it? Because it's gotten really ugly. I mean,
I always ask people, what's the cost? If you say yes and you go along with it and you get your paycheck and you get your retirement or your pension, or you get a big, payday from a contract, where are you going to spend that? You going to spend that in America that's tyrannical? Yeah. That's the real question.
So now, what I want to do is testify before Congress from Moscow. And I wish there was a way I could do that. I'll
bring my laptop in. They can go to me. They don't even have to use any U.S. government stuff. I'm more than happy to pay for the connection. That sounds hilarious.
Tell Matt Gaetz.
We're telling him right now. We're telling Matt Gaetz. Matt Gaetz, let's set this thing up. I want to see a remote testimony from Moscow. Look, there is precedent for things that are quote unquote enemies. They brought in the Japanese submarine commander who sunk the USS Indianapolis at the end of World War II. And they brought him in for a court martial, and they had him go and convict the captain of the USS Indianapolis of failing to zig and zag properly in this military tribunal. There is plenty of reasons that you might bring somebody in from another country that might even be considered hostile. So I think doing it digitally in the COVID era, the post-COVID world we live in, you can do it instantaneously. It'll be really late your time. That's the only thing. You'll have to be doing a late night. You have to have some coffee.
I don't care. I want to do it.
Yeah.
It would mean a lot to me. I know I'm never going to get justice, right? Like, I know that, but I would like to make it easier for the person behind me. And right now I feel like they might get the impression that, oh yeah, this works. This playbook works. We chased her away. I'm continuing my work. I'm going to keep working, keep exposing Biden. So I'm not going to shut up, and I'm going to keep pushing because now I have the freedom to do it. And I don't have the DOJ hanging over my head.
Can you imagine the little 8-year-old girl that was standing on the stump that was reading Karl Marx to her classmates? Could she have ever fathomed that you would have sought a safe haven in former Soviet Russia from the United States? Is that a thing you could ever even imagine any time in your life?
No, I really didn't see that coming. In fact, I didn't see it coming that I would be accused of being a Russian agent by Biden's people. So that was a sideways thing when that happened. Yeah. So this has all been very much a surprise. But, what I've learned is to, adapt and survive. Survive and adapt and survive. Mm-hmm. And that's what you do. And but there's no reason why I can't thrive here. There's no reason why I can't rebuild my life. Somehow I'll be able to maybe come back to my country of origin, but I don't know if it's going to act like if it's going to continue to have leaders like Joe Biden, then no, there's no reason for me to go back. But, I'll go back when it's safe and say hi. Otherwise, people are going to have to come here and see me.
And they might. Especially, I keep hearing people say, why don't you go to Russia? I hear there's a great expat community. And it's like, I keep hearing that too. And you say it like it's a mean thing. I keep wondering, you're rolling around, you don't even speak Russian, and you seem to be doing okay, which is kind of amazing. I don't want to leave my country either. I don't want to take my kids anywhere else, first and foremost. But it is truly interesting to see that. I want to buzz you about your interactions with the Russian government. What have they been, and with what agencies and what kind of people?
I haven't really had any interactions other than like going to the office to sign up for the paperwork for the asylum and then doing that process. And they ask you a few questions, and then now it's just in that bureaucratic, wherever it is, space on someone's desk, I assume. And that's it. Now I'm just waiting. So I haven't had much, I've been working with my podcast. I work with TNT Radio, which is out of Australia. And I do some commentary for RT once in a while, but that's it. And as far as expats,
RT is Russian Times?
Oh, no, it's Russia Today.
Russia Today, sorry.
And as far as expats, you were mentioning that I have met Irish, English, Australians that have come here, and I have met people that have sought asylum and then have made their life here and are much happier. And they said they don't want to go back, even if they could.
What are they looking for? What are they finding?
They're finding they're not having to be afraid to have their political or religious beliefs, whatever that is. Some of them are like Orthodox Christian or just Catholic. They're feeling like a sense of home for their children. Many of them have children and have them in school and said it's just a much superior education system and that it's free, and that, I mean, private school costs money, but like not, not what it is in the US. And it's just a much more thriving economy. Like it's more moving towards the future. So they're excited about it. People are more accepting. It's a kind of a laid back in a way. I know it sounds so odd because right now there's a war raging, but I have to say it's pretty laid back. It's not, because you're not having the sense of desperation that's going on in the cities right now, in Seattle and in San Francisco and in New York and in some of the rural communities.
In Chicago.
You don't have the drugs here. They're very strict about drugs. There is no drug use, and no, marijuana is not legal. So if you're into that, that's not the place for you. It's not legal and it's not wanted. So they're very strict about all drugs. And
what about alcohol abuse? I always hear that a lot of Russians die from abusing alcohol. Is that something you're seeing at all in the city?
I've seen 2 drunks. Like I've seen some drunk men. I haven't seen like what they're talking about. That's more from the 90s when there was like no money and people were literally just like, it was pretty bad.
Are we just getting disinformation that's just been fed from like a 90s like hit reel? Is that what's going on? I mean, I wouldn't put it past anybody at this point.
I think alcoholism, they have a pushback against alcoholism here because I think, it was a problem. It's like Ireland too, Irish people and English people up at the pub, it's kind of that. But like, no, they have a real pushback against alcoholism and that kind of thing here. But during the 90s, there was a lot of alcoholism. So that's kind of the stereotype from that, I think. But you don't hear like right now it's the middle of the night and my windows are open. And
I hear no sirens.
You don't hear sirens. You don't hear people shouting. You don't hear anything like that ever. Rarely. I don't know. I've never even seen a fight. And I've walked around. And the other thing that's really cool is I can walk around at night as a woman and feel safe. I don't feel worried. Everything's well lit. There's usually a lot of people out because, it's summertime and it's warm and it gets light early. But there are quiet times when there's not a lot of people and it still feels safe. When you go down under bridges, like Gorky Park has this section where you go along the river and then you go down underneath this bridge. I remember I kind of had this like bracing myself because, like in the cities in Seattle or New York, you go down under a bridge, there's going to be homeless people, druggies, possibly getting,
For sure.
robbed or whatever. No, it's like you go down underneath the bridge and there's just more families walking and people going to the metro or going wherever. And it was like, okay, this is really safe. I mean, it's a city, so I'm sure there's pickpockets. You got to, watch your stuff a bit. But I haven't had anything happen. I have been lost pretty much almost every day. I'll be honest. I have a bad sense of direction. But anyway, they will go out of their way to help me. Like someone will see me on my phone just looking confused and they'll walk up and go, in Russian, do you need help? And then I'll say, I don't speak Russian. And then they'll say, oh, I speak chut-chut English. And then they'll try to help me. And I never know where I am because the names of the streets are so long. And, so I'm struggling with the language a bit. But overall, I'm getting along fine,
That's so crazy. There's a Scorpion song that's called Winds of Change that keeps running through my head. That one, you know what I'm talking about? There's a whistle solo in there, and they talk about going through Gorky Park and how things are changing. Anyway, I just, all of our conversation yesterday and today has led me to think about that, and it
really is. I think the East is, it's become a multipolar world, and the East is rising, and the West is falling.
You're pissing off the CIA again. Why would you do that on my podcast?
I know. But the West, all the West has to do is become a partner and become like part of it. So then there's the competition is not with war machines, but with just economic, like Donald Trump. I have to go back to Donald Trump because I never supported him in the past, but he did make a point. Economic competition is what you want. You don't want war. You just want healthy competition. And then you have innovation.
He converted you. How did he do this?
I think by watching him like fight through all those indictments. My goodness.
You're experiencing a little, your own taste of it. I think that many people empathize with the Donald Trump scenario. Have you ever had a conversation over there about what's going on here? Does anyone even know what we're doing to ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, at RT, I've made my commentaries. They know my positions, so they understand.
What do they talk about when they're not broadcasting?
Actually, they try to be more defending of U.S. It's kind of interesting. They think I'm a little harsh, because to some of the young people, especially here, they think America is going to be great because that was the image they had. And I'm like, no, it's not great right now. It's not great. You don't want to go there. And they think they want to go there. And I'm like, no, because imagine they would be suffering Russophobia. Yeah. And they might even end up in jail because the United States is so mean to Russian nationals, like what they did to Maria Butina. She was not a spy. And everybody knows that. There's even an article that's called "The Spy Who Wasn't." She was totally set up and made. And actually, they used her case. The same judge that's indicting Trump indicted Maria Butina.
Right.
And using the FARA Act, which was never used before.
Which is not being used on Charlie McGonigal, by the way.
It is not?
No.
Okay. So what? Okay.
What do you think about that?
I don't know. It's like upside down world.
There's no counts of FARA violations in the indictments that I've seen, despite the fact that he was receiving money and working on behalf of Oleg Deripaska.
Of an oligarch. Yeah. Interesting.
And you theoretically were facing it. Up is down, huh?
And I'm not working. Yeah. And I'm definitely not working for an oligarch. Yeah. And when they make people out to be Putin, agents or whatever, it's like, he must have so many people on payroll.
Oh man. Yeah. Sounds great.
And why are so many of us
must
poor?
Be really wealthy.
Come on. No, but seriously though, that case is really interesting to me because he was accusing other people of what he was doing. It's just
up is down.
I mean, he worked in the FBI. How did he go to work every day and face his coworkers?
Sociopath, maybe. I don't know. I don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to me. At least Robert Hansen was like a nervous wreck all the time, is what everyone says, that he basically was constantly, had explosive temper and had all the pressure of what was going on. And I just interviewed his girlfriend. You can go back and watch it on our show. I did it on Monday of this week. And you can watch her talk about it. And she said he didn't give off any air. He didn't care. He walked around. He had a family. He had a wife. He was hanging out with her. She thought it was cool. He was introducing her as his girlfriend to the wife's cousin. The wife's cousin rented the apartment for him, presented as girlfriend. As far as she knows, like, they may have never even had any separation. He may have been married the whole time. He's obviously back with the wife right now. Just bizarro world. And, I grew up watching Robert Hansen and Alter James, like, basically get thrown in prison forever. That's what we used to do to people that betrayed the country and the oath. And now we got people like you that ran to the country that we were being betrayed to. It's totally strange.
How do you feel? Like, does that make you feel uncomfortable in some ways when you hear me sing the praises of Russia? Because I'm just telling you my real experience right now.
No, it doesn't bother me at all. It just makes me know how far this America is not what it was. I mean, we're a nation that is post-constitutional, I feel like. I say it a lot of times on our show. I feel like we've abandoned the principles that were why we were so proud of being American.
Do you think Biden's going to be held accountable, or Hunter Biden are going to be accountable for anything?
Do you?
Okay, we're going to walk.
Do you?
No. See, I'm not objective, and there's just this little part of me that thinks the good guys are going to win. That they're going to be their villainy really is going to be exposed. But I know realistically that's not.
I think realistically, the only way that something really, I don't know the path. I just tweeted about this the other day, so I put it in public already. I already own it. But I don't know how we avoid violence in this country. Because when you weaponize the federal government and you delegitimize the things that are supposed to be sacrosanct, like our judiciary, a blind lady justice that's supposed to weigh people. We always knew that the people who had more money and more access got a little bit of a better deal. That was always the case. Everyone always knew that if you had a little more money, you could, hire a better defense attorney, and maybe that defense attorney plays golf with the judge, and maybe you get a sweetheart deal. Like, that was always there. Everyone knew that, but you didn't think that the FBI was going to kick down your door and shoot you if you were 75 years old and overweight because you were an asshole. Like, and I don't know the guy. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was a really sweetheart and he was just an asshole online. I have an uncle that reminds me of the guy they just shot. Do you know the FBI shot a guy today?
They did? No.
In Memphis. You're not going to hear about it. That's 3 in a week we've shot. All SWAT shots. And I'm sure they were all justified. That's the other problem. But like, imagine a federal police force in another country that has shot 3 citizens for violations of the law or whatever. It's just, man, I can't remember a time when that was the thing in the FBI.
They're not even talking about it. I mean, you know,
They never do. They never do.
Yeah.
They control that media. It doesn't get out there. You want to talk about the stuff that we used to see when we were younger looking at the Soviet Union. It's like, of course they quash the story. Of course the only press that is doing it is the free press. Right now, the only people that are reporting on this stuff is local news and the suspendables, me and my buddies. And that's crazy. So it doesn't bother me that people are saying things are, I just know that if you say things nice about Russia, then people are going to go and say the same thing about me that they said about you, which is that I'm a Russian agent, which is freaking hilarious. Like I got a Smith & Wesson here that was made on the year that I was born. It's a American revolver. I get about as red-blooded as it gets. I got American flags all over the place. I don't have any tattoos, but if I did, it would probably be an American flag. And yet, they will accuse you of calling out this country when it's doing things that are wrong.
Well, and it's not even calling out the country. It's calling out the elites that are running it, the ones that are benefiting. And, you know, like my thing about Leon Panetta that I'm so disappointed about is that when I knew him as an intern, I looked up to him and I really thought he was serious and really wanted to do good things. And now I see his path, and he literally was just all about the power. His son was ordained basically as a congressman in the same district, as if it's now royalty. These Democrats think that, okay,
Chuck
now
Grassley's trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
He's trying to give it to his grandson.
Son, right?
Grandson,
or whatever.
I think.
Grandson. Yeah, it's like,
because he's 1,000 years old, because he's almost 100 years old right now. That's why. And people love Chuck Grassley. They get mad at you when you call out any of their sacred cows. But look, I don't care if you're Mitch McConnell or if you're Dianne Feinstein or if you're Chuck Grassley or if you're Joe Biden, you're too freaking old. And honestly, I think Donald Trump is too old, but he may be the only way that he stays out of jail. And so I can get behind the idea of it. I was not 100% behind Donald Trump until the 3rd indictment. And then it's like, man, are you kidding me? Yeah. Look, I want him to have a comeback like freaking Sly Stallone did in Rocky 8 or whatever, Rocky 11. Because it's like, I can't have the guy lose on that. You can't send the man to jail because he doesn't win the election. That sounds horrific. That sounds like what I thought Russia was like when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I just think it's so sad the way, you know, this is all kind of unfolding. And they're just blatant about it. They're not trying to hide it. Like the Democratic Party is not even hiding it. They're not. There's like, they're just, every time there's a new thing about Hunter Biden and a new revelation about the bribery and the scandals around the money laundering in Ukraine and Romania and China, boom, there's another indictment for Trump. But now these are serious. The ones that are in the States are going to be harder. Those are going to be hard for him.
Yeah, there's an argument. There's an argument that's being made right now. Mark Meadows is trying to bring his case federally. I talked about it on the show. That they're literally trying to bring it up. It's the same thing that you do when a federal agent gets involved in a shooting. What they'll do is they try to federalize the case under the fact that the person was operating under federal authority and fulfilling their federal job, and then the supremacy clause comes in. And then in theory, you get tried in federal court and/or it gets dismissed by the DOJ because the DOJ is not going to go do it because they understand the Constitution. And yet we have a weaponized DOJ too.
Yep.
So the only way this works is if this man gets in office, which is crazy. I don't want to vote who the president of the United States is based on whether or not that guy should go to jail because our country is unfair.
Yeah.
I wasn't mad about his policies. I thought he did a good job until the COVID lockdown. So it's like, all right, fine. If I have to choose the lesser of two evils, it's a no-brainer. Donald Trump wins that hands down, you know? And yet...
Well, and that phrase, the lesser of two evils, though, is really kind of sad, isn't it?
It's always been there, has it not?
Evil is just evil. So there's not lesser than.
Well, there was always a lesser than. I feel like nobody's ever perfectly represented you, and no one's ever perfectly represented me, and so we were always choosing somebody who agreed with us most of the time. But the idea that if you didn't agree with them, they'd put you in jail is that's new.
Yeah. And so I took action, and I decided to not go back and face that, because, you know, frankly, you know, and I said this to you yesterday when I was kind of tearful, like, I'm just not finding anything about my case. I can't, you know, I mean, I'm going to miss my daughter's wedding. I'm going to miss my daughter's graduation. for masters. I'm missing these life events. This is heartbreaking, and it's my country. I was born in Monterey, California, and I loved it. And I'll never see it maybe again. And it's simply because I told the truth.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense. And I'm trying to make sense of it, and it doesn't, and it's hard. And I don't want anybody to have to go through what I'm going through. But if I'm going to have to make that choice and I have to live here, I'm going to make the best of it. And frankly, I'm kind of lucky in a way, because at least I have a roof over my head. I have a way to make a living. I have people that care about me already. I mean, they're very loving and caring here. And that's the thing. You always hear about Russians being really cold. I've not experienced that. They're very warm, very loving. And they smile at you. That's all a bunch of bullshit. I was at the subway the other day and someone smiled at me and I smiled back. All these myths. They do give, space. It takes a while to get to know someone, but that's also in most cities. It takes
and that's a very Slavic thing anyhow. I just feel like all Slavs are like that.
Yeah. So there you have it. But anyway.
Do you have a faith tradition that you
Well, I'm Catholic.
Under? Do you go to Catholic Mass?
I was going to look at some of the Orthodox Christian churches because they're really beautiful. And I was going to look at that. But yes, there's a beautiful Catholic church here, a couple of them. Yeah. And there's actually a priest here that is friends of a British man that I know who he wanted to introduce me to, an Irish priest.
I love it. Well, if you go, you give me the update on that. I hope you'll come back and give us an update on your status too. You don't have to be a stranger. Anytime you want to come on here and let us know what's going on, give us a different, wider perspective on there. And I'll figure out a time that I can come on and be on your TNT show as well. I'd be happy to.
Love that.
We'll work out a time to do a tape delay. Since folks, if you don't know, Tara's show goes on exactly the same time as the Kyle Seraphin show is aired live. We overlap each other, although she is 8 hours ahead of us. So I know it's getting very, very late there. Tell people where they can reach out to you and give messages of support, where they can buy your book and all that kind of stuff. Just kind of plug all the things that you might do, because I know people are going to want to know more.
I kind of made it easy. It's one place, tarareadepodcast.com. So READE. is how you spell my last name, tarareadepodcast.com. It's where you have links to my book, links to everything, and my Twitter account at Reade Alexandra. You can find me rage tweeting once in a while. Sometimes I'm tweeting nice videos of Moscow. It depends on my mood.
Yeah, fair enough.
I rage tweeted about Biden a couple times today. You can have fun with that. I know. Yeah. And
do you know that your hardcover book is selling for $1 cheaper than your paperback book on Amazon?
It's funny.
I don't know why, but it is. Yeah, it's kind of funny. And people can find your memoir there. Yeah.
And I'm doing the Audible. I'm adding, actually, what's coming with the book is I'm adding an epilogue called Moscow. So I'm going to talk about Moscow. And I'm also doing an audio version of the book. So that's coming.
Fantastic.
So get ready.
Yeah, does Rose McGowan? She does the foreword, which is amazing because she is definitely a lefty and probably not a big Donald Trump fan. And yet there are things you can all agree on, that people shouldn't have to be victims of powerful people. Well, Tara, thanks so much for spending more hours than you planned on with us. I do really appreciate it. I really enjoyed talking to you. I'm glad you look better than the last time I talked to you. You look less stressed. And I hope that is the case. Even though it's tough to be away, I'm glad you're in a place where you feel safer, because I know what that war looks like and what it does. It's exhausting. So, all right.
And good luck to you too and your family. Please give your family my love. Take care.
I will. Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much. You've been listening to the Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live from Liberty Hill, Texas, America. And we are very grateful to you for joining us. Thanks so much. Please consider giving us a 5-star review on Apple, which you can go ahead and find in the show notes directly below me, and we will read them on the show. Like this one here from Falculon. Says, love the show, 5 stars. Spicy takes on the state of America. Great guests. Just like this one today, we want to say thanks to Tara Reade for joining us from Moscow and giving you her inside story, the scoop on what she's living through, and why she made the decision to stay over there. I think it's pretty chilling, but I think it's really important that we hear these things. We do want to say thanks to all the folks that it takes to build this show up, our guests, you, and our technical producer, Ryan Matta, who does a fantastic job. Please follow Ryan on Twitter at Ryan Matta Media. That's Matta. You can also find him on True Social at Ryan Matta, Matta. TTA. You can find him later on this day on Rumble, on LFA TV show, his show, Matter of Fact, MATTA. You get the pattern. You know what's going on here. Folks, don't forget to like this video. Scroll on down. Give it that thumbs up, that green. Piss off the CIA if that's what it's doing. Upset those who are trying to run counterintelligence cases on American citizens who simply have some disagreements with our political structure. And we will see you again tomorrow for Friendly Friday. Hang in there. I know it's getting rough out there, folks, but we're going to keep telling the stories, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to The Kyle Seraphin Show, streamed live weekdays on rumble.com/Kyle Seraphin. Follow Kyle on Twitter, Truth Social, and Instagram at Kyle Seraphin.